I don't share this often because, even after 10 years, I still cannot decide if I narrowly escaped something or if the whole thing was just a really strange coincidence that I've never managed to explain. When I was 16, my parents' house sat near the edge of town, one of those sort of half-forgotten suburban streets where the lampposts flicker and the mailbox all lean a little to the side. It was the summer, humid and slow, and I spent most afternoons just home alone. My parents, they both worked late, and my older siblings had already moved out, so the house was quiet except for the ticking of the old kitchen clock that we had. One Thursday evening, just before sunset, a car that I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. It was an older model sedan with a fading pizza decal on the side. No phone number, no logo, just the image of a single slice. The driver got out, a guy maybe in his early 20s, wearing a brown polo and dark jeans. He had a few earrings in one ear and a face that looked perpetually tired, like he'd been awake too many nights in a row or something. He rang the doorbell, holding a pizza box. "Delivery for you," he said. I told him that he must have the wrong house, that we hadn't ordered anything. He frowned, looked at a small notepad, and muttered something under his breath before calling someone on his phone. The conversation dragged on for a while. He kept saying things like, "That's the address that you gave me," and "No, I'm not driving back with it." Finally, he hung up and sighed. "They'll just toss it," he said, shrugging. "You can have it if you want. Paid for, apparently." I hesitated for about half a second. Free pizza sounded like a win, and he looked harmless enough. So in the end, I took it. Nothing strange happened, too. I ate a few slices, texted my friends, and I went to bed. But about 2 weeks later, it happened again. Same car, same guy, and same story. They messed up the order again. This time he seemed a bit more casual, leaning against the doorframe like we already knew each other. I remembered thinking that he seemed kind of like a cool older guy, I guess, even if he was a little bit mysterious. But by the third time I invited him to sit outside on the porch while we ate, we talked about nothing in particular. Movies, music, small-town boredom, stuff like that. He had this sort of soft, almost distracted way of speaking, as if part of his attention was somewhere else all the time. After that, too, the visits became sort of irregular but familiar in a way. Sometimes 2 weeks apart, sometimes more than a month. I'd stopped questioning it, to be honest, which now feels absurd to admit, but it became a bit of a routine. The car in the driveway, the box in his hands, the quiet conversations that never went deeper than surface-level chat. But looking back on it all, there were little things that just didn't fit. Like, he never wore a uniform, never carried a delivery bag, just the single pizza box each time. His car never smelled like food, only like faint cologne and engine oil in the times that I sat in it. And though he mentioned his boss often, I realized later that he never once said the name of the pizzeria that he was apparently employed by. He always came when my parents weren't home too, which was odd. Then, one afternoon, I saw his car idling at the end of the street. I thought that maybe he'd gotten lost on another delivery or something, but after a few minutes he just sort of drove away. And that was the last time that I ever saw him. Months passed, life went on, and I started college. Then one evening, my mother came home with a local newspaper folded under her arm. She told me about a string of burglaries in nearby towns, homes where residents had apparently been given wrong deliveries. The victims had all accepted food that they hadn't ordered, usually from men posing as drivers from small, unlisted restaurants. Hours later, the occupants would be found unconscious or disoriented, their homes ransacked. Some woke up days later in the hospitals. The police said that the food had been laced with a tranquilizer, not enough to kill, but enough to immobilize. No one died, but 8 households were definitely hit. The suspects, They were all described as 3 men, operating together, led by somebody older who had handled the deliveries or something. Witnesses mentioned the same detail each time as well. A rusted sedan with a peeling pizza decal and a driver wearing earrings in one ear. My mother was literally halfway through reading this when she froze and looked at me. "That's the same guy that you described as coming here," she said quietly. I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't stop replaying every detail. The easy smile, the strange patience, the way that he almost stood just a little bit too close when handing me the box. I never did get sick and I never blacked out. I don't know if he changed his mind or if I was just lucky because I never did eat every piece of the pizza after all. There was always something left over. Or if maybe there was something different about my pizza. Maybe he was testing how far he could actually push his little routine before moving on to the next home. What I do know is this though, whoever that guy was, I'm pretty confident that he was the guy mentioned in the newspaper, and if that's the case, then I was definitely being targeted. When I was a kid, there was a part of the forest that my grandfather told me to never set foot in. He wasn't a superstitious man too, not in the way that small town folks sometimes are. But when he spoke about the stretch of pines behind the old quarry, his voice would dip low, like he didn't want the trees to overhear. He never called it by name, only said, "You just don't go there with a rifle." It wasn't until years later, long after he'd passed, that I started hearing the stories from others around town. Some called it the Looker, others said the Hollow Stag, but most wouldn't call it anything at all. They just sort of went quiet and gave you that quick nervous glance, the kind that says you shouldn't be asking about that. Well, my grandfather's story went like this. One autumn morning, sometime in the late 1970s, he was hunting alone near the lake. The world was still, no birds, no wind, not even the usual rustles of leaves. He found a bit of a rise overlooking a clearing, and he settled into his blind before dawn. When the first light crept in, he spotted a buck step from the trees, a monstrous thing with antlers wide as his outstretched arms, and he always said that it didn't move like a deer. It sort of glided quietly and deliberate, as if the woods parted to make way for it almost. Well, he lifted his rifle, lined up the shot, and then the air changed. It was like the forest pulled tight around him, pressing against his skin. He said that he suddenly knew that he wasn't supposed to shoot this thing. But the strangest part is that he heard a voice, clear as day, though it came from nowhere and sort of everywhere at once. Not in his ears, but inside of his head. A low, steady whisper, "Don't." He stopped immediately and couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The buck's eyes met his, and for a second he swore that there was something human looking back at him. Then it blinked, turned, and just walked off. When he finally climbed back down from the blind that he was in, his truck was half a mile off, surrounded by tracks now, hoofprints, dozens of them, not wandering and not grazing, but circling in a perfect circle around his vehicle. Well, he left there and he didn't return for at least 3 days. I'd grown up thinking that it was one of those tales meant to keep kids out of trouble, right? Well, it was the first snow of the season, the kind that falls soft and dry and makes every sound feel far. I'd been tracking a whitetail across the ridge east of town, right where the timber starts to thin. There was no reason to remember my grandfather's warning until I saw it. A set of tracks that didn't quite look right, too deep for the size and way too sharp. The prints, they led me to a clearing that I'd never seen before, though I had hunted that patch for years. And there it stood, a buck, broad and still, watching me through the mist. The antlers were wrong somehow too, branching out and sort of curling like roots, slick with frost. My hands moved on their own, lifting the rifle, but before I even looked through the scope, I could feel it, a presence pressing against the back of my neck. My breath fogged in the air and the forest went still suddenly. Then, faint but unmistakable, I heard a whisper, so close that I swore that it brushed past my ear. "You see me now." The deer didn't run. It just tilted its head, eyes glinting like wet stone, and I couldn't shoot. I couldn't even lower my gun. My body locked up completely, heart hammering and breath caught, and then without a sound, the creature turned and disappeared into the trees. When I finally made it back to my truck, the frost on the windshield, it had melted into perfect handprints. On the inside, though. But when I checked the glass, I then noticed that they were on the inside. The air suddenly smelled like wet earth and blood, and I didn't hunt again after that all season. In fact, I haven't been back since then, and I really don't know if I'm ever going to go back. It's been over a year now, and the memory still sits at the back of my mind like a photograph that I cannot quite throw away. At the time, it felt like nothing more than another one of those humid, late-night hangouts that we always did. My best friend had these battered old playhouse-sized sheds that were behind their family's property, and we had turned them into our own little hideout. We decorated it with strings, stashed a speaker in the corner, and used it for anything that we didn't want to do under her parents' roof. It was cramped but cozy. 3 mismatched chairs, a rug, and a window so dusty that you couldn't see out of it. That night, it was just me, her, and her older cousin. We had been drinking some cheap wine, passing a vape back and forth, and playing music low so as to not wake the house. After a while, her cousin fell asleep on the floor, half under the chair, her phone still in her hand. My friend and I stayed up, still a bit restless. We kept the door cracked to let the air out a little bit, but everyone knew that the door screamed like a literal dying animal when you tried to open it or close it. Even with both hands to steady it, it groaned so loud that it echoed through like the whole street, basically. Now, sometime at around 1:30 in the morning, nature called. The house was dark and we didn't want to risk waking anyone going inside. So in our slightly tipsy state, we decided to slip out front and use the bushes along the porch. We told ourselves that it was just like camping. Truthfully though, it was just laziness, to be honest. The night air was heavy though, still, with the faint buzz of insects. We whispered and laughed as we went around the front, never really thinking about the fact that the shed door would have given away anyone else leaving. On our way back, we cut along the side of the house, a narrow strip of grass between the siding and the fence. The back porch light, it spilled just enough glow to catch movement between the shed and the house. At first, it was just a figure, female with long hair catching the porch light. She stood half-turned so that we couldn't see her face clearly. For a heartbeat, we thought that it was her cousin. I mean, the height was right, the build was right too. But her cousin had been dead asleep when we left. We sort of froze in place. The figure slowly tilted its head, then raised a hand and beckoned. The voice that followed was soft but clear. "Hey, come here," they said. It was the strangest thing too. It sounded almost like her cousin, but the pitch was a bit wrong, like an echo of a recording played on the wrong speed. Neither of us spoke. We just stood there gripping each other's arms, staring. The figure didn't move any closer. It just kept its arm lifted and sort of waiting. Some instinct must have kicked in because we both bolted. We ran straight off the lawn and down the street until our lungs were burning. Mind you, there was no destination, just away from whoever that was. When we finally slowed, gasping, we realized just how stupid it was to be standing out in the street at night with no phones and no plan. After a few minutes, we decided that we needed to head back. We crept along the sidewalk, staring at the shed and nothing else. Then we sprinted the last stretch, flung the door open and shook her cousin awake. She sat up groggy and irritated, hair an absolute mess, and asked us what the problem was. She swore that she hadn't moved, hadn't heard us leave, hadn't opened the door. We believed her. The shed door had been silent the whole time that we were outside, and you could not mistake that noise for anything else. Besides, she still smelled of sleep and wine, and really, I don't imagine that she would have done anything like that. We didn't sleep after that. We sat up whispering, occasionally glancing at the gap under the door as though something might slide into view. The next morning, sober and sunlit, we told her everything. She laughed nervously and called us crazy, but she also admitted that she had no memory of that night between when she passed out and when we woke her. We still use the shed from time to time. We still play music there, though now we keep the door fully shut. And if we ever need to use the bathroom, we definitely go inside like normal people now. We don't even joke about it anymore, too. It's just a story that we don't finish telling when somebody new comes over, I guess. I really don't know what it was that we saw. The cousin sleepwalking, some prowler, something stranger, but the image of that figure, half turned in the porch light like that, whispering "come here" in a voice that just wasn't quite right, that has not left either of us. Some nights when I think about it too, I'm not sure if it wanted to hurt us or if it seemed just sort of curious. All I know is that we both saw this person, and we both ran. When we first crossed into Canada, we thought that the hardest part would be adapting to new schools, new jobs, and new winters. We were very wrong. The strangest challenge was the place where we landed, a string of weekly rentals while we searched for something somewhat permanent. My husband, our 3 boys, Daniel, Luca, and Evan, my mother, who was slipping deeper into Alzheimer's, and I, plus our 4 cats, all crammed into borrowed houses full of other people's furniture and also smells. Most of the rentals were uneventful, but one on a quiet road outside of Newmarket unsettled me the moment that I stepped inside. It wasn't anything obvious, no blood-red walls, no flickering lights or anything, but the main bedroom at the end of the hall just felt wrong for some reason. Cold in a way that had nothing to do with drafts. The cats flattened themselves and hissed at corners that I couldn't see anything in. That first evening, too, the boys were gaming in the living room when a framed print of some generic landscape fell straight off the wall and clattered onto the floor. We set it back without a comment. We're a family who's always had one foot in the paranormal anyway. Weird noises or flickers of movement don't automatically scare us anymore. But this was different. It felt watchful. Well, at 2 a.m. after we told the kids goodnight one night, my husband and I went into the cold room. He sat down on the mattress and shuddered a little bit. "I don't feel right," he whispered. His breath steamed in the air, though the heater was on. And before I could reach for him, his voice shifted, low, distorted, like an echo played backwards. I pulled out my phone and began a prayer that I'd learned years ago. The sound coming from him wasn't so much a voice as much as a reversal of mine almost, like static on a tape. I called for the kids, but my words seemed sort of muffled, swallowed by the walls. I tried again, louder, and this time Daniel burst in. My husband's face was chalk pale, his muscles taut, his eyes unfocused. The cats clawed at Evan's legs as if pushing him toward me, while Luca hovered by the doorway, trembling. We tried everything. The rosary my mother still remembered how to finger, a bottle of holy water that we'd brought from the old house, Reiki techniques that I'd used on friends. Nothing worked. My husband reached out a hand for Luca, but he recoiled. "It's not him," he said. Then, abruptly, my husband straightened and said that he felt better. He stumbled to the bathroom down the hall and splashed water on his face. I caught his reflection in the mirror before he did, and for a heartbeat, it just wasn't him at all. It was someone else, smiling. I told the boys to sort of pull him away, and they dragged him back as he laughed a little bit. Then sort of a thin metallic sound echoed throughout the home. "Do you think a little prayer will move me?" he said, his voice not quite his own now. We dragged the mattress into the living room and made him lie down while I whispered, "All of you go toward the light." He then began convulsing and then sort of sagged, whispering that he felt lighter. He was back to his old self, and the night didn't end there, though. When I tried to call my father to pray with us, the line fizzled out each time, and my husband's sister told me to take him to a hospital, but something in my gut told me that it wouldn't really matter. At dawn, my husband stepped outside to smoke. When I joined him, he said softly, "We've been waiting for you," and I asked, "Who's we?" And he stammered, eyes unfocused. The air suddenly smelled like something metallic and rotten. Well, we left that morning for a different rental, but it didn't end at that threshold. For weeks afterwards, I would feel this thing arrive before even he did, like a draft moving across my skin, and literally run to him to tell him to fight it. We finally secured a small house and called a local parish for help. The priest came but refused to enter. He sprinkled holy water from the porch and promised to arrange a blessing, but no one ever came back. Help actually arrived from an unexpected place, to be honest. An older couple that I had met through an online forum at one stage. They prayed with us over video call, gave us grounding rituals, never even asked for a cent. Slowly, too, the atmosphere shifted. My husband's eyes cleared, the boys stopped waking up screaming at night, even the cats stopped staring at the corners. People always assume that immigration stories like this are about new jobs, new cities, and paperwork and all that. Ours, though, was completely different. It was about a house, a season, and something that came to meet us between borders, it seemed. I still don't know if it belonged to the rental, to us, or somewhere else, but I only know that when we left, whatever it was finally loosened its grip. I was born in this house, and my earliest memories are of the smell of my mother's cinnamon rolls in the kitchen, of the sun slanting through the dining room window, of the sound of my father's boots on the back porch. The house is small but sturdy. Clapboard walls, creaky oak floors, a basement that smells like old rain. People definitely have died here. My great-grandmother passed in the upstairs bedroom, in fact, and an uncle that I barely knew was found at the bottom of the stairs when I was a child. I've never thought of it as haunted, well, until recently. It started when I was a teenager. Every morning, without fail, the lower kitchen cabinets, they would always open. Not all of them, but just a few. The ones on the left side where we kept the heavy pots. My parents thought that it was me sneaking snacks late at night at one stage. I thought that maybe it was my brother. Eventually, when he moved out, it became a bit of a family joke. The kitchen fairy strikes again, my mum would say. I started double-checking them before bed, even taking photos with my flip phone to prove that I'd shut everything. And every morning, the doors would be open again. Now, I like to consider myself as a bit of a rational person. I told myself that it must just be sleepwalking or something. My mum once caught me standing in the hallway at 3 a.m. after all, eyes open but unseeing, so maybe I'd been doing it for all these years and I just learned to ignore it or something. Fast forward to last night though. I'm 28 now and my parents are gone. Dad has passed and Mum's in a care home now and the house is mine. It's quieter than it used to be, though it never really feels empty, I suppose. In any case, I woke up thirsty at around 2:30 in the morning and padded down to the kitchen. The hall light was off, but the moonlight poured in through the windows above the sink, enough to see. And I heard something before I saw it. A soft sort of slow creak, like a rocking chair but wetter somehow. When I rounded the corner, my heart almost flipped in my chest. One of the lower cabinet doors was swinging back and forth on its own, and something was crouched in front of it. It was tall, even hunched down like it was, taller than me if it had stood up. Its back was to me and a silhouette darker than the kitchen itself. Not shadow and not smoke, but something with edges, like cloth draped over a frame but with no texture that I could name. Its arms, long and jointed too far down, and it gently pushed the door back and forth over and over again, as if it was timing the swing to some unheard rhythm. It turned its head suddenly, and I couldn't see its face, just a suggestion of where one should have been. The cabinet door froze mid-swing like a movie paused. My mouth suddenly went dry. And then, all of a sudden, it just wasn't there anymore. Not vanished with a puff or a blink or anything, but it was just gone, like the space of where it had been was never occupied to begin with. The cabinet door fell shut with a soft click, and strangely, I didn't feel terror, and that's what's really hard to explain, I suppose. No pounding heart, no scream, just a deep, cold sort of emptiness, like the air in the kitchen had been hollowed out. I stood there with my glass of water halfway to my lips, feeling like I had stepped outside of my own body. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I backed out of the kitchen and went upstairs. My phone was in my hand, but I didn't remember grabbing it, and when I finally lay down, the house suddenly felt like it was listening. This morning, the cabinets were open again, every single one of them. I've started noticing other things too. The cats that I have, 2 of them, they won't go near the kitchen after dark. Sometimes I wake up with my sheets pulled toward the floor, as if something has tugged on them at night. Sometimes I smell damp earth like a cellar left unlit for decades. Objects that I leave on the counter move, but not in ways that I can really explain anymore. I asked a neighbor, Mrs. Coatstrain, who's lived on this street for like 40 years now, and if she knows anything about the house. She lowered her voice and said that that's the old Wilkes place, isn't it? Built on the edge of the quarry. My grandmother used to tell me not to walk past it at night. Said that there's something in the crawl spaces that doesn't like being seen. And then she changed the subject again. I've tried to capture it on camera, but nothing ever shows up. No shadow, no figure, but when I review the footage, I can always, feel it. The sense that something is there, just outside of the frame, moving slowly and observing. Some nights I wake up to the soft creak of cabinet doors over and over, like that quiet rhythm again, and I cannot follow. I know that I shouldn't watch it. I know that I shouldn't move, but sometimes I just cannot stop myself, and when I get out there and look, there's nothing there. I don't think it's trying to scare me. It doesn't seem to be trying to hurt me, it just watches, I guess. And in the quiet of the night, well, that's enough to make me feel like I'm not alone in my own home. And that is pretty frightening, let me tell you. I've started sleeping with my bedroom door locked now, but I swear that I can feel it down there anyway. Always there and always playing with that cabinet door. It was autumn of 2020, during that strange time where the whole year was sort of suspended, when time felt like it slowed to a syrup. With jobs gone and routines disturbed, my boyfriend and I filled our days with just wandering, really. We'd only just relocated from New Mexico to the Pacific Northwest a few months prior, still strangers to the deep greens and endless rain here. We had already explored a handful of coastal towns and mass-covered trails, and with so much empty time, driving out into new places became almost a ritual, a way to feel like life was still moving. That particular weekend, we had spent a few days meandering through the western edge of the Olympic Peninsula. We'd stopped in tiny harbour towns, admired black rock beaches, and eaten our lunches sitting on driftwood. On our way south, we came across a gravel pull-off near a curtain of moss-laden evergreens. It was the kind of spot that you'd miss if you weren't looking, the sort of green tunnel that seems to swallow the light whole almost. By then, dusk was sort of settling in, and the cool air had the early September sharpness to it. We had planned to make sandwiches for the road, but we decided instead to stretch our legs a bit. It was only supposed to be a few minutes. The forest there, though, was unlike anything back home. Ferns as tall as a person, cedar trunks twisted with age, and a floor so soft that it felt like walking on something alive. We followed what seemed like an informal path, though in hindsight it may have just been an animal trail, really. At first it felt tranquil. The air was still, our voices sounded small. But as the last color drained from the sky, something changed. A heaviness crept in, subtle but undeniable, like a weight on my chest. My boyfriend slowed too. He's normally unfazed by woods at night or pretty much anything, but even he kept glancing behind him. Not long after, we discovered the ground wasn't as solid as it looked too. He took one step forward and sank almost to his hip in what appeared to be a shallow depression, but gave way like a rotted trapdoor. The soil crumbled, revealing a black cavity beneath the ferns. I literally had to grab him under the arms to help pull him out, and as I did, the edge sort of collapsed further, widening in a dark shaft. The top layer of pine needles and moss disguised it perfectly, and I could not see the bottom. That was when the temperature seemed to plummet too. The warm day had ended hours ago, but this was something sharper. In fact, it almost felt unnatural. I exhaled and saw my breath curl. My boyfriend muttered, "We should head back, yeah?" It should have been easy. We hadn't gone far, 100 meters maybe, 200 at most. But when we retraced our steps, nothing looked familiar anymore. The trees seemed denser, the moss thicker. The faint animal path that we had followed had now simply vanished. We tried pulling up Google Maps, but the signal was gone. I started to feel the kind of fear that sits behind your ribs, and the quiet wasn't normal forest quiet anymore. It was way too still. Then came the rustling. Small at first, then moving in little bursts like something circling at a distance. My boyfriend squeezed my hand, but said nothing. At the edge of our headlamps, I caught sight of something pale, moving between the trunks. Just a flicker, white and almost translucent. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it kept happening. There one moment and gone the next. I asked him if he was seeing it too, and he just nodded once, jaw tight, and kept walking. The deeper that we went, the more I felt watched too. The shapes, they never fully emerged and only slid from one patch of darkness to another. Once I thought that I heard something like a high-pitched syllable, very faint and very quick, like something trying to not be heard. But I'm not sure about that. Maybe it was the wind in the branches or something. After what felt like what must have been an hour, he said quietly, "I see a clearing." I followed him until the undergrowth broke into an open patch of churned dirt and heavy equipment. It was a logging site. We had no idea how we had ended up there. And from that clearing, we could see the thin strip of asphalt far in the distance. It was our car, a tiny dark shape at the edge of it all. We practically jogged to the road without looking back, and when we finally reached the car, my hands were trembling so bad that I found it difficult to unlock the door. Once inside, though, I turned on the headlights and I looked at my phone. The service was now back, and according to the map, we were nearly a kilometer away from where we had actually parked, yet somehow we hadn't crossed a single road or trail to get there. Well, the next morning over coffee, after we got back, I asked him about what we had seen. He admitted that he hadn't wanted to scare me, but he had counted at least 2 of whatever they were, maybe 3 of those pale shapes. He described them as not exactly people, but hazy and humanoid, slipping between the trees just as he turned his head. He also said that he had heard the same high-pitched noises that I had heard, like fragments of a voice, but not quite human. I tried to research later sinkholes in that area, any legends of, like, white beings or things of this nature, anything that would make sense of what had happened there, but there just really wasn't much. A few mentions of old logging pits and hollow ground, things like that, but nothing about pale figures in the woods. We still hike, but I've never gone off trail at dusk again after that. Whatever was out there, it didn't chase us, which I was thankful for. It didn't touch us or anything. It just watched us. It all started when Claire and I were on one of our early morning runs one morning, the kind where the fog hangs sort of heavy in the valleys and everything feels quieter than it should. We'd been talking about odd experiences, things that just didn't make any sense, brushes with the unexplainable, I guess you could say. That's when she told me about something that had happened to her father years ago, something that she said that still made her uneasy just to remember it. Now, Claire grew up on a remote stretch of farmland in northern Alberta, a property so big that you could lose yourself in it for hours. Her dad, Jim, he was a fearless man, a man who had battled storms, black bears, and stubborn machinery without even a second thought. But one afternoon, he came across something that even frightened him a little bit. He was working near the far edge of the property, clearing overgrown brush and hauling logs with his old tractor. The sun was starting to tilt toward evening, painting long shadows across the field, and as he steered the tractor up a small rise, he suddenly felt an unnatural tug, a force so strong that it literally lifted the front of the machine higher than any bump or hidden rock could have. Before he could react, the tractor lurched backward violently, tipping on the edge of rolling over. Then, unmistakably, a voice spoke out, right into his ear. It was low, cruel, and full of amusement. "Take that," it said. Jim later described a sensation much like hair pressing against his skin while the tractor teetered. He scrambled out of the seat, barely avoiding what would have been a crushing fall, and the field went deathly silent around him suddenly. The wind stopped, the birds were still, and the unusual hum of insects had vanished. The only sound was his own pounding heart now. When he looked back, the tractor was settled flat on the ground. No apparent damage and no rocks or obstacles anywhere. The tracks in the soil, they curved strangely though, almost like something unseen had nudged the machine into place. He didn't wait to investigate any further though. He walked the long stretch back to the farmhouse, adrenaline making each step feel heavier than the last. Claire said that her dad never returned to that corner of the land again after that, even during the daytime. He leased the far field to another farmer, allegedly, refusing to speak of whatever had happened there, except in hushed tones to the family every now and then. And when he did, he always ended the story with the same shiver-inducing line. It wasn't just trying to scare me, it was waiting for me to slip. That morning, Claire and I didn't say much as we jogged. Months later, though, whenever I pass an empty field or a lone rise in the distance, I always remember that story, and it always sends a creeping sensation up my spine. The sense that there's something more to this life, something that is beyond sight, and that it isn't all good. Back in 2019, I was working endless shifts at a catering warehouse, 50, sometimes 60 hours a week. The days blurred into nights until my 4-day breaks felt like stolen time, really. I didn't go drinking or clubbing like most of my co-workers. Instead, I threw myself into exploring forgotten places with my oldest friend, Mason. We had been sneaking into abandoned buildings since we were teenagers. But that year, we turned it into kind of a ritual, really. Every time I had a stretch of days off, Mason would pick a new site, we'd pack our gear, and we would head off to see what history had left behind. We called our trips missions, half-jokingly, like we were operatives instead of two 30-somethings with flashlights and cameras. By then, we'd done about 24, old grain silos, defunct churches, boarded-up train depots. Most were harmless too. A few were a little bit eerie, but one or two of them definitely left us genuinely shaken. The one that I'm about to tell you about, well, that's the one that still sits with me, very uncomfortably. It was late autumn, a crisp weekday morning. I drove to Mason's apartment, our backpacks stuffed with batteries, masks, gloves, and our cheap camera gear. While scrolling through his laptop over breakfast, he told me about a property that he'd found, Hollow Manor. The online listing called it a colonial estate with antebellum renovations, but locals said that it was much older than that, possibly predating statehood even. Some even claimed a vice president had once slept there on a tour of the region or something. The house wasn't visible from the main road. It sort of sat hidden behind a sprawling but still operational hospice center. We parked a few blocks away, our boots crunching on damp leaves as we walked. A sagging chain-linked fence separated the hospice grounds from the estate. Conveniently, a man-sized tear had been cut into it, so we slipped through it and entered what looked like servant quarters, I would guess. A small brick building separate from the main house is what I mean. There was a narrow corridor of mossy stone that led us toward a dried-up fountain and another passageway beyond. And it was literally the first step into the mansion's kitchen that sent a weird vibration up my legs. Not like a floorboard creaking, but literally like standing too close to a transformer humming. Mason didn't seem to notice, though. The kitchen was massive but stripped bare except for some rusted stoves and some rotted shelving. We stepped into the main corridor and just stood there looking at everything. The ceiling soared 20 feet high, a crumbling mural of angels and clouds still visible in places. A wide U-shaped staircase spiraled to the second floor, while a door to the right led down to the basement. The entire house was like a time capsule, really. Its grandeur rotted but still impressive. We could see the ceiling had caved in as well, forming a stagnant puddle at least 50 feet across. We explored slowly, snapping photos of warped wallpaper, fallen plaster, and fragments of old furniture. There was what seemingly was a prayer room at the far end, and it still had its marble altar, though someone had clearly been living there recently. There was a rolled sleeping bag, an old dented thermo, and a single worn leather shoe lay scattered on the floor. The main entrance was bolted from inside, so we decided to head back and check the basement before leaving. Now, the basement was low-ceilinged, lined with old pipes that must have been from renovations in some future time, and some cracked tiles. There was nothing supernatural about this place, nothing dramatic. It just smelled of like mildew and iron. We had been inside for maybe over an hour by then, and the house had been utterly still. No distant voices, no echoing footsteps, just water dripping from somewhere above. But then came a sound. Now, this was not a normal scream. I'm convinced that it wasn't even entirely human. Whatever it was, it started soft, like someone inhaling sharply, and then literally rose into a shriek that felt like claws were scraping across my nerves. Mason and I locked eyes, and we didn't say a word. We just literally ran. Up the basement stairs, down the hall, tripping over debris and trying not to look behind us. Mason shouted "kitchen" through the kitchen, and we bolted, our boots slapping against the warped wood as the scream echoed again, closer this time. Like whatever this thing was, it was now following us. We burst out of the kitchen door and sprinted across the overgrown yard, finally ducking back through the hole in the fence. We didn't stop until we were 3 blocks away, bent over and gasping for air. Only then did I dare glance back. But the house, it just stood there, silent and dark, its windows like black eyes. We never did find out what made that sound. There were no records of squatters in the manor that I could find, no reports of strange occurrences, nothing. Later, Mason admitted that he had seen something at the top of the stairs before we fled, and he said that he wasn't sure, but he didn't believe that it was a person. Instead, whatever it was pale. It had a crooked silhouette leaning over the banister as if watching us go. We never returned to that place, and I still scroll through our photos sometimes, but the ones from that day, they are the only set where every single image that came out of it is like slightly warped. Like something is brushing in front of the lens while we were there every single time. And some days I find myself thinking back about that place, and I remember that scream, and every time I do, I just shudder. I don't usually share things online, but lately I've been having trouble sleeping and this keeps replaying in my head, so maybe sharing it here will help me make some sort of sense of it and I'll finally be able to rest. It all happened last winter when I was staying at my sister's place while she was out of town. She'd asked me to look after her dog and just keep an eye on the house for a week. The neighborhood was pretty quiet, one of those older suburbs where every driveway is lined with huge jacaranda trees and most of the houses look like they've been there for like decades. The first couple of days, they were pretty much uneventful. I worked remotely, I walked the dog, and just basically kept to myself. On the third evening at around 7 p.m., I was in the living room when the dog started growling at the front window. Now, he's a pretty calm dog, so that immediately got my attention. I peeked through the blinds and I saw a white sedan parked halfway down the street, engine running but the lights were off. At first, I figured that it must have just been a neighbor or someone waiting for a friend. But about 10 minutes later, someone knocked on the front door. Slow and deliberate knocks. Not the kind that suggests a delivery or somebody lost, just patient and measured. I didn't move at first. The dog was barking so loud that I could barely think. The man outside didn't say anything for a while, and then I heard it. A quiet voice saying, "I know someone's home." Something about the tone really was wrong. It wasn't aggressive, it was conversational, like he was talking through a wall to an old friend. Obviously, I didn't want to engage, so I grabbed the dog by his collar and backed away toward the kitchen. But the knocking started again, louder this time, and then came the sound of something scraping lightly across the door, like a fingernail or maybe a coin tracing the wood grain. I went upstairs to look from the guest room window that faced the street. The white sedan was still there, idling. The man was standing just under the porch light now, and that was when I realized that he wasn't a stranger. At least I thought that I recognized him. There was something about the way that he stood, the slouched posture, the tilt of his head, that felt sort of familiar, like someone I'd seen in a photo at a distance or something. But I just couldn't place him. He was maybe in his late 40s, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. That's when he called out my sister's name, not mine but hers. "Is Anna here?" His voice was calm. He said it a few more times, like he expected her to eventually answer. I stayed crouched by the window, not daring to move. My phone was in my pocket, but for some reason I didn't call anyone, and I just watched. After a few minutes, my nerves got the better of me though, and I went back downstairs and turned off every light in the house. From the hallway, I could see the faint outline of a shadow moving across the frosted glass door. He knocked again and said, "I just need a word. She left something with me." That sentence still bothers me, the "she left something with me" moment. I thought that maybe it was some kind of a scam, or maybe he was confused. But the longer it went on, the less it felt random. He knew this house. He knew the name. Eventually, I said through the door, "You've got the wrong place." Silence. Then he whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I cannot explain it too, but hearing that, it felt worse than if he had threatened me. I turned the lock on the deadbolt just to make sure that it was definitely secure. That faint metallic click must have given me away too, because the second that it sounded, he stepped closer, his shadow filling the glass now. I backed away, heart racing, the dog barking like he was losing his mind now. And then, just like that, the engine outside revved, and the sound of footsteps faded. When I looked out again, the sedan was gone. I tried to tell myself that it was over, but sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept replaying his words over and over in my head again, that voice saying that I shouldn't be there. The next morning, I called my sister and I told her what happened. She got quiet and said, "Yeah, that is strange. Someone came by last year asking about me too, and it was the same kind of thing. Said that I'd left something with them." She didn't recognize the man when I described him, but when I mentioned the white sedan, she paused again. "Be careful," she said. "That car used to park outside here at night, and I thought that it was just a neighbor, but I don't know. It's been 6 months and I've moved back home since then, and I don't stay there anymore. But twice now when I've gone to visit her, I have noticed a car idling a few houses down, always with its lights off and always empty when I try to get a closer look. I try to tell myself that it's nothing, just bad timing. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with this image in my head, a man standing on a porch that isn't his, repeating a name that really he shouldn't know, waiting for someone to open the door to do, well, who knows what. When my father passed away 2 years ago, I inherited the old family house on Norwood Street. It had been sitting empty for a while, in fact, ever since my grandmother was moved into care. I'd avoided the place for years, partly out of neglect and partly because I just didn't feel right being there. It wasn't the kind of house that you looked forward to visiting, is what I'm getting at. Not haunted in any sort of storybook way, but just heavy, still, and the wrong sort of quiet. It was built in the late 1940s, a narrow one-story place with creaky floors and faded wallpaper that had started to peel in the corners. My grandparents, they bought it brand new. I never met my grandfather, and no one really talked about him too much. My father used to say that he drank himself mean and that the house remembered too much yelling. I didn't know what that meant back then, but these days, I think that I do. So I moved in temporarily last spring while repairs were being done on my own home. My 2 kids, Matthew, who was 16, and Olivia, who was 11, stayed with me on those weekends. It was supposed to be simple, just a few months of cleaning, painting, and making it sort of livable again. But from the first night, though, something felt very off. The house had this sort of, strange sort of rhythm to it, I guess is the best way to say it. Quiet for long stretches, but then sudden noises that made no sense. A drawer closing by itself, a door that wouldn't stay latched, things of this nature. I chalked it up to old hinges and just the settling of wood and all that. That's what you tell yourself to keep things normal and yourself sane, right? The hallway, though, the hallway was the worst. It ran straight through the middle of the house, connecting the bedrooms. No windows, no light, just that single bulb above that flickered every now and then. I couldn't walk down it without feeling like something followed just a few steps behind me. Never close enough to see, but close enough that I knew that if I turned around too quickly, I might actually see it. The last time that I'd felt that way in this house, I was about 15. I stayed overnight after a football game and woke early while the house was still dark. I remembered hearing what I thought was someone dragging furniture in the next room. When I checked, nothing had moved, except for the faint shape of dusty footprints on the blankets where I had been sleeping. I told myself that it was just a trick of the light, but there were definitely footprints there, like somebody had walked in from outside and walked over the blankets with dirty feet. It's one of those memories that just sort of gets heavier the more years pass and the more that I think about it. Well, a few weeks ago, my kids were the ones staying there, and I had left for work in the morning, only a few hours, and told them to hang out and just watch some TV and feed the dog and all that. It must have been around noon when Matthew called me. His voice was tight and shaky, not like him at all. He said that he heard banging from the kitchen. I figured that it was the old pipes or the back door shifting in the wind or something. But then he said, "The cabinets are opening, all of them." He sounded absolutely terrified. I could also hear Olivia crying in the background, and I told him to stay on the line, but before I could say more, there was this sudden burst of noise through the phone, like drawers being yanked out one after another, echoing through the house. And he said that the kitchen drawers were sliding open, then slamming shut on their own. He then went quiet for a second, and then whispered, "It's moving down the hallway now." My stomach instantly dropped upon hearing that. That hallway. He said that the doors started closing one by one, not slamming, but just shutting, deliberate and steady. Then the closet at the end of the hall burst open, hard enough that he said that the handle hit the wall. I told him to grab his sister, to get outside, and to wait for one of us to get there. He hesitated, said that it's not letting us leave the hallway. That's when I told him, as calmly as I could, to stop talking about it. Don't look at it, don't record it, and just move. When I got there 20 minutes later, the house was silent again. Every cabinet and drawer stood open, The hallway was empty, but the air, it felt so heavy, almost charged, like static or something. Both kids were sitting on the porch, pale and absolutely shaking. Olivia refused to even go back inside, and honestly, I didn't blame her. Later that night, after they'd gone to sleep at their other parents' place, I went back to close everything up, and that's when I noticed something strange. The big mirror at the end of the hallway, the one that my grandmother used to keep spotless all the time, it had a huge handprint on it. Too high up to be Olivia's, and way too small for Matthew's hand. I wiped it away, but by the next morning, it was back again. My grandmother doesn't remember much these days. When I visited her last week, she didn't recognize me right away. But as I was leaving, she grabbed my wrist suddenly and said, "Clear as day, don't stay in that house at night. He still walks the hallway." I didn't ask what she meant, because I think deep down I already know. The house is empty again now. I turned off the water, locked the doors, and I just left. I didn't expect to hear from Darren again. We'd gone to university together, but after graduation, he'd moved across the country and we lost touch. About 3 years ago, I would say, he reached out to me out of sort of nowhere, asking if I could meet for a coffee. He sounded tired over the phone, like someone who hadn't slept properly in months, but when we met, he didn't look like the man that I used to know. His hair had gone mostly grey, and he carried this strange weight in his eyes, like he'd been seeing something that hadn't fully let go of him. He said that he needed to talk to someone who wouldn't think that he was crazy, and I told him that I would listen, and he told me the story that I still think about pretty much every single night. So Darren used to run a home security company with his wife, Emily. They'd built it from the ground up, just the two of them in a rented office above a laundromat. For years they scraped by, slowly gaining clients until they could finally expand. It was supposed to be their future, their shared dream. Then, one rainy morning, Emily was hit by a delivery truck on her way to a client meeting. He said that after that, the world just flattened. His house felt wrong, the air felt too heavy, even the sound of his own footsteps in their living room made him nauseous, he said. He stopped answering calls, stopped showing up to meetings, stopped sleeping. Within a few months, the business fell apart, as you can imagine. The bank called in their loan, debt collectors started coming by, but none of that seemed to matter to him. Darren said that his mind had just gone quiet in a way that honestly scared him, that he wasn't sad anymore, but just hollow. He barely noticed when winter came, and one evening while the city was wrapped in snow, he found himself in the basement looking for something. He couldn't remember what it was, but he just knew that he didn't want to go back upstairs. Now, the basement was unfinished. Cold concrete, half-exposed beams, and the faint smell of dust and iron. He sat on the bottom step, staring at the empty space, and that's when he noticed the beam above him. He said that the thought didn't come as an idea or a decision. It was more like remembering something that he'd already agreed to. So, he went to the hardware store the next morning and bought a length of rope. When he returned home, the sky was dimming, snow beginning to fall, and he carried the rope downstairs, set it on the floor, and stood staring at the beam again. For the first time in months, too, he felt calm. Not peaceful, but just ready, if you know what I mean. But while he was tying the knot, he said that something moved in the corner of the basement. At first, he thought that it was a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from the narrow window well. But then it shifted again, too smooth to be an illusion. It was a shape, a figure, crouched low against the wall, like it had been there the entire time, waiting for him to notice. He said that it wasn't a person. Well, not exactly. Its limbs were too long and its head hung too far forward, hair hanging in clumps that touched the ground. It made no sound and it just watched him, its outline trembling slightly in the dim light. When he looked directly at it, he said that the air seemed to sort of fold inward around it. The shape tilted its head, and the motion reminded him of someone trying to understand something curious but hungry. Then, in a dry, scraping whisper, it said, "Go on, I'll take what you leave behind." Darren instantly froze. He said that the voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, in fact. It sounded as though it came from inside of the concrete, though, inside the house itself, muffled by it. He asked it, without really knowing why, "What do you mean?" The thing leaned forward and, though it didn't move closer, he could now literally feel its breath, cold and sour, like wet soil. It then said, "The one who waits upstairs, she's small, she dreams in your name, you won't need her where you're going." That's when he remembered his daughter. He said that the memory hit him like a slap. He hadn't seen her in weeks. She'd been staying with Emily's parents while he sorted things out. He realized in that moment that if he did this, she would be alone. And worse, this thing, whatever it was, seemed to be suggesting that it would now come for her. He ripped the rope down, hand shaking, and stumbled backwards towards the stairs. The thing exhaled sharply, a sound like a hiss or a sigh, and the basement light flickered out, and that was when he ran. When he told me this, he said that he fled upstairs and he could hear the faintest whisper following him up the steps, saying, "Coward." He drove through the night to his in-laws and woke them up and begged to see his daughter. He said that she looked up from her bed, smiled, and told him that she dreamed about her mother again, standing at the foot of her bed, whispering that she missed them both. He literally just broke down right there on the floor, too. Since then, he has begun to rebuild his life. He works for a construction firm now, he pays his bills, he's sober as well, but he told me that he refuses to go into basements anymore. And every now and then when he gets too tired or too quiet, he swears that he can feel that same cold air just behind him. He said that the worst part isn't knowing that this thing exists too. It's actually in wondering just how many other people hear it too, just before they go. There's a small coastal town a few hours north of where I live that most maps don't bother naming anymore. Locals call it Hollow Bridge, after the rotting wooden overpass that once led to the old churchyard. When I first stumbled across it, I was just passing through, chasing antique shops and abandoned places to photograph for a project that I was working on. But the moment that I saw that church, its white paint weathered to the color of bone, its spire tilting against a salt grey sky, I knew the place had something deeper written into it. Something that I believed at the time watched back. Now, the entire town has been frozen in time, literally. The streets are lined with century-old houses, every window frame painted in the same pale hue, every door left slightly ajar by the wind. The preservation laws here are pretty strict. Every building must remain as it was when the town was founded in 1897. Even the nails, they say, are replaced with period-accurate ones. It gives the place a strange stillness, I suppose, as if it's not being lived in so much as kept alive. The church, it stood at the end of the road, framed by skeletal gums that creaked in the sea wind. I hesitated at the threshold. My grandmother used to tell me stories about places like this, buildings that remembered their dead too well. Being sensitive to energy, for a lack of a better word, I'd learned not to intrude without invitation at the very least. Still, curiosity won out and I stepped inside. The interior was breathtaking too. Every beam, every pew, every crack in the old altar bore the weight of a century's worth of prayers. Dust hung in the air like slow snow. The scent of aged wood and candle wax lingered faintly. But beneath it was something else, an undertone of salt and something like iron. It felt aware, watching. I stayed only a few minutes that first time, long enough to sense the dozens of presences that drifted in the rafters, quiet and observant. They didn't move toward me, but I could feel their attention. Not hostile exactly, but just wary. I left with the distinct impression that I'd interrupted something sacred. Months later, I returned too, unintentionally actually. My brother's wedding had been relocated there after the coastal chapel that they'd booked flooded. I didn't tell him about my earlier visit by any means, and he's the kind of man who rolls his eyes at words like energy and presence and all that. So I stood outside in the drizzle with a cigarette and a knot in my chest the whole time basically, watching guests filter through the heavy wooden doors until the rain forced me inside. Now, the moment that I crossed that threshold, the church just seemed to exhale. The air suddenly grew heavy, pressing against my ribs like a tide. But instead of hostility, I felt warmth, familiarity even. The light from the chandeliers flickered as I took a seat near the back, and I told myself that it must have just been faulty wiring. I mean, the place was ancient after all. As the ceremony began, I noticed something unsettling though. There were more figures than guests in the pews, the faint silhouettes of others sitting between families, pale, transparent shapes that moved when the living didn't. They leaned in, whispering to each other in tones that I couldn't hear. Some smiled, faint and wistful. Others seemed to be watching the bride with hollow fascination. None seemed aware of the others beside them, but my husband's aunt, recently widowed, sat across the aisle, and when she began to cry softly into her glove hand, I saw a man, tall, with his head bowed, rest his arm gently on her shoulder. The moment that she looked up, though, he literally just disappeared. But I swear that I saw the resemblance in his jawline, the same as her late husband's. Again, my chest tightened. The air shimmered faintly, and for a second, the entire church felt crowded with invisible grief almost. When the ceremony ended, people laughed, took some photos, and drifted towards the exit, leaving me standing alone near the altar. And that was when I saw him. At first, I thought that it was the minister returning to collect his notes, but the man at the pulpit wasn't dressed in modern black. His robes were grayed with age, and a faint light bled through the edges of his form. He was tall, stern, and utterly still. His gaze wasn't on me, but on the empty pews. I whispered under my breath, "Are you—" before I could stop myself. He turned, then meeting my eyes, his expression softened. "Not the first to ask," he said, his voice dry as parchment. "The others usually run." "I've seen things before here," I murmured. He smiled faintly, the way one might smile at a child. "Then you know that this place keeps its own kind of congregation. I've been tending to them since before the sea changed color." I didn't know what that meant, but I nodded anyway. He continued, "You tread lightly. I noticed that the first time that you came. Few do." I told him that I hadn't meant to disturb anything, that I'd just been passing through. His smile widened slightly. "If only everyone passed through so gently," he said. Then, almost conspiratorially, he leaned in and added, "There are those who linger here who shouldn't, some who cling to the living far longer than they're meant to. If you return, perhaps you could help them find the way." Before I could respond, a low sound rolled through the rafters, a hollow, resonant bell tone, though the church's bell tower had been silent for decades. The air trembled. He straightened. His expression darkened. "They're waking up again," he said quietly. "The ones who never left." Then I literally blinked, and he was just gone. That was kind of frightening, to be honest, and when I finally stepped outside, the sky had turned a deep, impossible shade of blue. The color right before true night, really, and the guests were now long gone. I looked down at my phone, and it said that it was nearly midnight now, though the ceremony had only just ended after dusk. I should have been terrified, I know that, but all I felt was strange and weird. Now, weeks later, I still think about that bell, and sometimes I hear it faintly in the distance when I cannot sleep, tolling once and then fading in silence. And each time I think about it, of what the pastor said about those who never left, I don't think that the church wanted me gone that night. In fact, maybe it's waiting for me to come back. What do you guys think that I should do? Should I go back, or should I just stay away from that place? When I was 22, I moved into a narrow 2-story duplex at the edge of an old neighborhood that most people in town avoided after dark. It wasn't the worst area, but it had that sort of brittle, half-forgotten feeling, cracked pavement, porch lights that burned out and were never replaced, stray cats that watched from fences like they knew things that you didn't. But the rent was cheap because the place had been empty for a long time, and so I snapped it. The leasing agent, they mentioned that previous tenants didn't stay long, but brushed off my question with a bit of a laugh. At the time, I didn't think too much of it. I was working long days anyway at a local florist, and my boyfriend, Cal, he worked late shifts at a printing warehouse too. I mean, we barely saw each other except on the weekends, and we barely stayed at home. It was really just supposed to be a temporary sort of dwelling place for us, just until we saved enough to move somewhere better. But the first few nights were pretty much uneventful too. The house was drafty and creaked like it was adjusting to having people inside of it again. But there was one thing that I just couldn't ignore. The air always felt a bit off when I came home from work, like too warm and too still, as though someone had been in there recently. Cal said that it was just the insulation, and honestly, I wanted to believe him. But then one evening after a very long shift, I came home to something that I still could not explain. Now, the moment that I opened the door, the noise hit me, a talk radio station blaring so loud that it rattled the windows. Every single light was on, even the closet bulbs, and I heard the radio as I was coming toward the front door. Also, there was a really odd smell in the air. I stood there a little bit unnerved. Cal's shift started an hour earlier, so I knew that he wasn't home. I hadn't touched the stereo in weeks at this stage, and it didn't even have an antenna plugged in. The cat, Willow is his name, was nowhere to be seen. I shut off the stereo, though, and walked around the rooms calling for her. Every sink I passed, too, was filled to the brim with water, still and glassy and perfectly level, as though someone had taken their time filling them and stopped exactly before they spilled. I mean, not a drop on the counters whatsoever. When I finally found Willow, she was trembling in the pantry, perched inside the highest cabinet, a good 7 feet off the ground. Mind you, the door was closed when I entered, and there was no furniture nearby that she could have used to get up there, and she wasn't the kind of cat that jumped onto things too. I also still have no idea how she even got in there when the door was closed. I even had to use a chair to reach her, and even then she wouldn't let go of my arm once I got her down. I ended up locking myself into the bedroom, shaking, and I called Cal. He stayed on the phone with me as I went through the house, checking every room, every closet, every window latch. Everything was untouched. Nothing missing and nothing broken. When I told him about the sinks and the stereo, he sort of laughed nervously and said, Maybe our ghost's just trying to make it look like somebody else's home. Maybe it scared off whoever was fighting next door. There had been an incident earlier that evening, you see. 2 men shouting outside the neighboring unit, security escorting one away. The timing was too close to be coincidence, but I didn't know what to make of it. Cal tried to keep things light, told me not to show fear. If it is something weird, he said, just don't feed it. They like fear, or so I've heard. For a while, things were quiet again too. I convinced myself that it must have just been a prank, or maybe a surge that triggered the stereo, but I still couldn't explain the water or anything, but I just tried to look past it. But then, a few nights later, Cal called me while I was at work and his voice sounded wrong, low and unsteady. He asked me if I had cleaned that morning. I said no. He went quiet for a second and then said, the floors, they're perfect. Vacuum lines everywhere, but no footprints, no trail to the closet, and all the dishes, we didn't even dirty that many, but they're stacked away like someone did them hours ago. Again, he tried to laugh it off, saying that maybe the ghost took his joke seriously about doing chores. I laughed at that too, I'll be honest, but I also felt very uneasy about it. That night, we slept with the lights on, and a few days later, I woke up at around 3 in the morning to the sound of dripping water. I got up and followed it to the bathroom, expecting to see a leaking tap. Instead, Willow sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring down into the empty basin. Her tail flicked once, twice. The faucet was dry, but condensation beaded across the porcelain like breath on glass. When I leaned closer, I swear to you that I heard something bellow, soft and distant, like the hum of a radio through static almost. A voice, maybe 2, whispering under the surface. Well, from then on, Willow wouldn't sleep anywhere but on the bathroom rug, always staring toward the drain. I tried to lure her away, but she'd hiss if I picked her up, and Cal and I eventually broke the lease. There were just too many little things that kept happening. The cold spots, the faint sound of running water behind the walls, the light that flickered whenever one of us entered the bathroom. The landlord didn't seem surprised when we left early, and he only said, well, you lasted longer than most. Years later, I actually drove by that old duplex. The windows were now boarded up, but someone had painted over the door with a symbol that I didn't recognize. A ring of small white handprints or something, like a circle of children pressing palms against the wood. I have no idea what that's about, but in any case, I was glad to be out of there, and I certainly won't be going back. When I was a teenager, my summer job was working at an outdoor youth program in the northern range of New England. One of the supervisors there had this sort of tradition. Every year, the older crew would do a high climb before the season ended. It wasn't mandatory or anything, but pretty much everyone went. You didn't want to be the one who stayed behind. That summer, we set out for a peak known for its brutal winds and unpredictable storms. The locals just called it the Ridge, though it had a formal name that I cannot remember now. The mountain had this permanent layer of mist that clung to it, and even on the clearest days you could still see strips of snow packed into its cracks. There were 10 of us, all around 17, and 2 adult leaders. We hiked for most of the day before stopping at a timber hut just below the summit. The place was old, maybe a century or more. Its floorboards had long warped from the frost, and the door never really latched unless you kicked it shut. Someone had carved initials into nearly every surface too, even the bunk frames. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't nerves or anything. I mean, I'd done overnight hikes before. It was just something about the quiet. When the wind paused, it was like the world just sort of stopped breathing. No bugs, no shifting wood, just emptiness. I don't remember when I first heard it. Maybe it was around midnight or close to that, but it sounded like somebody murmuring, not talking but sort of struggling to. A few of us were spread across the floor in sleeping bags, but I couldn't tell who was making the sound. I thought that it might have been one of the counselors dreaming, until it got much louder. And it wasn't one voice, it was several, all low, strained, and half-formed. At first, I thought that it was the wind slipping through the gaps in the walls, but the rhythm just wasn't right. The noises came into burst, soft at first, and then suddenly rising into panicked tones, like a dozen people, all crying out for help at once before falling silent again. The strangest thing was that every time that it happened, I could feel it, a vibration under the wooden floorboards, almost like the mountain itself was groaning. At some point, I sat up trying to spot who was doing it or where the sound was coming from. Everybody was still. I leaned over, whispering to the guy next to me, "Did you hear that?" He stirred and mumbled something, but when I tried to explain what I was hearing, I sort of stopped halfway. It sounded insane even as the words came out of my mouth, so I told him not to worry about it and to just go back to sleep. That night, I lay awake the entire night. The noises came and went, sometimes far away, sometimes close enough that I could have sworn that they were right above my bed. At around 3 in the morning, everything just stopped, dead quiet, and it stayed that way until the faint light of morning started pushing through the cracks. When I finally sat up, I noticed something on the small fogged window by the door. There were marks. They looked like handprints, clear as day, pressed into the condensation from the outside. There were 5 or maybe 6 of them, some high and some low, and upon seeing them, I didn't feel right. By the time that I got up and moved closer, a gust of cold air came through the gap in the frame and the moisture sort of slid down, erasing them completely. Nobody else saw them but me, and apparently nobody else heard anything too, as I sort of cautiously checked with people. I wanted to tell them, but I didn't in the end. So we packed up and started the final push to the summit. I remember looking back at that hut once before the trail curved away. It was sort of half swallowed in fog again, as if it hadn't been there at all, and you could barely see it. Now, years later, out with some friends, I was swapping some ghost stories over some drinks, and on a whim I just sort of mentioned that night. The voices, the handprints, how I could never explain it. One guy pulled out his phone and started searching. He turned the screen toward me after a minute. "Is this where you stayed?" The photo showed a small wooden structure on a rocky slope. Same slanted roof, same single window beside the door, and the article above it read, "Hike to the cabin that locals call the listening post." I sort of skimmed through it. It said the cabin was built on the same site where a group of climbers froze to death in the early 1900s. Their bodies weren't found until the thaw, and according to hikers, people still hear voices up there when the weather turns still, voices that mimic the dying, calling out for anyone to answer. I didn't finish the article. I mean, I didn't need to. What unsettled me wasn't that the others didn't hear anything, but it was that the story said that the last thing that those climbers ever did, before they died on that slope, was apparently pound on the door of the shelter, trying to get inside, but it was allegedly locked and their hands were frozen over so they couldn't get in there. And that window with the handprints, it was the only one that didn't lock from the outside. And that, well, that's pretty disturbing, right? I never really believed the old stories that people told about the Cordillera Mountains. Tales of restless spirits, abandoned lodges, or voices that wander through the fog. To me, those were the kind of things that you shared around bonfires or to scare tourists. But a few years ago, something happened that made me think differently about all of this. My wife and her cousin had planned a short break in the Highlands. We wanted quiet, cooler air and maybe some time away from the city noise. Her cousin, she found a cheap old-fashioned inn near the center of town. It was a bit dated, but full of character, she said. That didn't bother me. I mean, I definitely stayed in worse places. So we arrived late in the afternoon, and the moment that we stepped into the building, the air changed. The lobby had that sort of smell that old wood gets when it's soaked with rain for decades. Sweet but sort of rotten underneath. The lights were dim, yellow, buzzing faintly. The floorboards sagged as if the building were a bit tired. The man at the desk gave us our key without a smile, and I remembered his eyes. Not unfriendly, but distracted, I guess you could say. Like he was listening to someone else. Well, our room was on the top floor, down a hallway that felt too narrow for how long it was. When we finally reached the door, the key jammed into the lock for a moment before turning. Inside, the room was dark and a little bit musky. There were 2 narrow beds pushed against the opposite walls and a tall window that looked out into the fog-shrouded park below. While my wife unpacked, I went to the bathroom for a bit, and when I turned the latch, something sharp caught my skin. A thin slice along my finger, and I winced, watching the blood heap up. I checked the latch, and it was smooth, and there was no rust, and there was really nothing sharp enough to do that. When I came out, she was struggling with her suitcase lock. It was jammed, and she said that it's never jammed before. I tried too, but the combination wheel just refused to move, as though someone had wedged it from the inside. We had to sort of pry the zipper free just to open it in the end. Maybe it's the altitude, I joked, though I definitely felt a little bit off. Anyway, that night we decided to leave the small lamp on. The air inside the room just felt a bit still, and there was a faint vibration under the floorboards too. It was like a sort of quiet hum that just sort of came and went randomly. My wife's cousin said that she felt cold air brushing her hair even though the window was shut tight. It must have been around 1 a.m. as well when we all finally drifted into uneasy sleep. Now, nothing happened that first night. Well, not really. But all 3 of us woke up feeling sort of watched, I guess you could say. The next morning I went to take a shower. The pipes struggled and made a metallic groan and then went silent. When I turned to grab the soap, the handle, though, twisted on its own. Just a little bit, but it was enough for the water to run again, and I sort of stood there watching it, feeling that slow electric dread in my stomach. I didn't tell anyone. I mean, I didn't want to sound crazy. After all, this building is super old, and it could have just been something to do with the pipes or whatever, but we spent the day sightseeing, trying to laugh off the unease. The market was busy, and the mist lightened, and for a few hours I almost forgot the way the inn had made me feel. By the time that we returned that night, the corridors were colder and quieter. I noticed our reflection in the glass doors of the lobby looked darker as well. The fluorescent lights flickered, but in the reflection they didn't. I remember that specifically too, and just how odd that was. We went to bed at around midnight that night. Sometime after 2 as well, I woke up to the sound of crying. Not loud and just soft, steady, right behind the wall near my pillow. At first I thought it was somebody in another room, but the sound didn't move. It just sort of stayed there, like whoever it was had pressed their face to the wall and was trying to whisper through it. I turned to wake my wife, but she was already sitting up and said, "You hear that?" Her cousin was awake too, eyes wide, clutching her blanket. That was when the crying got louder as well. Then it suddenly changed, less like crying and more like someone struggling to speak through water. A wet, choked noise, every few seconds broken by gasps. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. No one moved, and I wanted to say something, anything, but the moment that I opened my mouth, the air in the room suddenly shifted, colder, heavier, like the space itself was pressing inward toward me. My wife shook her head sharply, her eyes pleading for me to be quiet. so I shut my mouth. The sound went on for maybe what felt like about an hour, I would guess. Sometimes near, sometimes far, and then abruptly it just stopped and there was silence. As you can probably imagine, none of us slept again that night. We left the next morning before sunrise. The receptionist didn't look surprised when we handed back the key and just sort of nodded slowly as though he had seen this before. On the long drive back down the mountain, no one said a word. 2 days later, back in the city, we finally talked about it. Her cousin said that she had felt someone tugging at her blanket that night too, allegedly. My wife admitted that she had seen a shadow by the window, a tall shape bending over as if peering in. Which was weird because, our room was on the top floor, and there were no ledges outside of that window. Later, when I couldn't stop thinking about it too, I looked up the inn online and it had shut down the following year. Someone had written about it on a small local forum, said that the building stood on the ruins of an old hospital, destroyed in a landslide years ago, and they said that during renovations, workers apparently found a sealed basement beneath the lobby, full of broken beds and metal glass medicine bottles and all that. The post ended with a photo. That same hallway, the same door, and below it in the caption in one sentence, "Sometimes when it rains hard enough, you can still hear them calling for help." I literally shuddered upon seeing that. At first I thought that maybe it was just in all of our heads, but other people, seemingly, have experienced it too. We didn't choose this house for its beauty. It was the kind of place that most people drove past without even a glance. Narrow, leaning slightly, like it had been forgotten by time. But when my partner and I found it, something about its quietness just felt right to us. It stood at the edge of a hill where the neighborhood thinned out, the last house before the trees began. The agent said that it was built in 1929, solid bones but strange layout, and laughed when she mentioned the old furnace that still made a racket. But it had character, and that's what we told ourselves. The first few weeks were good too. Well, except for some sounds. A sort of constant low groan through the floorboards, the kind that old houses breathe when they settle. We would wake up to faint knocking from the walls, like pipes expanding or footsteps muffled by distance. We got used to it though. Every old place has its own voice, right? But as summer turned into autumn, the house started to feel, awake and sort of alive. Sometimes the temperature, it would swing violently, like the air couldn't decide what season it belonged to. We'd be sitting on the couch and suddenly feel our skin sort of prickling with heat, sweat beading along our necks, and literally minutes later, the air would turn so cold that we could see our breath. Our heating system was brand new and we had had it checked twice, but there were no malfunctions that anyone could find. And then came the smell. It was faint at first, the scent of something scorched, like a match blown out. Other times it was damp earth or wet metal almost. Once it smelled like rotting fruit, and it would sort of appear and just vanish, never lasting more than a minute, but it always made me nauseous. Well, we called every specialist that we could think of, electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, even pest control, but really nothing changed. But one of them, an older electrician, lingered longer than he needed to as well, and when I asked what he thought of the smell, he just shook his head and said, "Well, sometimes the walls remember things." I didn't ask what he meant. By winter, we stopped making excuses though, and one afternoon I was cleaning when I heard my partner call from upstairs, "Hey," clear as day, like they were standing right above me. I shouted back, "What?" and there was no reply. I went to the stairs, heard it again, this time a little bit sharper, so I climbed about halfway up and then I heard the same voice behind me from downstairs calling my name. Every hair on my neck suddenly went up and I sort of stood there listening. The voice called again, closer this time, and with it a dull bang from the living room, like furniture was shifting against the wall. There was another bang and then another, and that was enough for me. I ran outside, and when my partner came home an hour later, I was still standing on the porch shaking. But they swore that they hadn't been home and they hadn't called and hadn't said a word, in fact. That night, too, I slept with the lights on. Over the following weeks, whatever was in that house became bolder, too. Doors would open on their own, the faucets turned themselves on. Once I found the hallway mirror fogged over from the inside, not from heat, but as if somebody had breathed across it. We began to dread the nights there the most, too. I would wake up drenched in sweat, gasping for air as if somebody had pressed their hand over my face. My partner said that they felt pressure on their chest, as though the mattress had another weight on it. It always happened between 2 and 3 a.m. as well, and the worst was the choking, though. So, I woke up once unable to move, unable to speak, and my throat was sort of cinched by something invisible. My vision blurred at the edges, and it was black closing in like ink spreading through water, and I remember thinking that I was about to die, and then suddenly it just released. I gasped, clawed at my neck, but there were no marks, and there was nothing there. The next morning, my partner said that they dreamt of someone standing at the foot of the bed. Not a shadow, but a figure made of smoke, its mouth moving silently. We started sleeping in shifts after that, one of us awake with the lights on and the other pretending to rest. But it didn't matter. Whatever it was, it knew when we were scared, and the more frightened we became, the stronger it seemed to get. We brought in a local priest once, though he didn't really believe that it would help. He stood in the doorway and sort of looked around and quietly said that he couldn't step inside. His eyes were wide and wet, and he whispered, "It's not a spirit that you have here, it's the house itself." Then he just left without another word, and I literally could not get hold of him again. That too was the last night that we ever spent there. When we did finally move out, the house looked normal in the daylight, quiet, harmless, even welcoming. But as I loaded the last box in the car, late in the evening, I heard it again. A single heavy knock from inside. And now I was certain that it wasn't the pipes and it wasn't the wind. Just one deliberate sound echoing through the walls like a heartbeat. We drove away from that place and we never looked back. So I was at my grandma's house one time. I was around 4 years old at this point. It was right after Halloween, and I say this because I remember the tiger costume that I wore that year. But anyway, I'm sitting on my grandma's lap, just eating some candy and watching TV with her, when I happen to turn my head back and see someone moving from one of the bedrooms to the bathroom across the hallway. It happened fast, and the figure was all black, but not like a shadow. It was a solid cloaked-looking figure. At first, I really didn't know what to think. I just kept watching. I thought maybe it was my cousin, Easy, playing a prank on me because he liked to scare me a lot back then. But Easy wasn't there that weekend. He was supposed to be at a friend's house, and it was just me and my grandma until my grandpa got off work later. So I sat there watching, and after a little bit of time went by, I remember seeing the figure sort of poke its head out from the bathroom and wave at me. There was no face to it, though. It was like it was wearing a black veil and a hood over its head. It disappeared back into the bathroom before doing it again, popping out and waving at me. This time, I alerted my grandma and told her that there was someone in the bathroom. I was scared because I didn't know or understand who this could have been, but I know what I saw. My grandma gets up and walks down the hall to the bathroom. Mind you, no one ever exited the bathroom, or I didn't see anything. And of course, after looking, there was no one there. I even followed her and looked myself, but there was no one. So we checked all 3 other bathrooms after that, and there was no one in the house but us. I don't know what that was. I don't know where it came from, but this is something that has always stuck with me. Years later, as an adult, I've had 2 dreams about the hooded shape or being or whatever it was, but that's it. I've never encountered anything else like this before, and I say this as someone who's had a fair share of ghost run-in encounters. I honestly wish that there was a bit more to this, but really, that's all there is. This all happened about 10 years ago. I just graduated high school and was living with my grandmother at the time. At this time, I had no idea what sleep paralysis even was, nor had I heard of any of these types of experiences. I've never done any drugs other than smoking a bit of weed every now and then, maybe 2 or 3 times a year earlier, but I've never had any problems with anything. Now one night, right before falling asleep, in a spare bedroom with all the lights off and the door closed, I felt an extremely weird and unsettling feeling in my body. My body all of a sudden felt extremely heavy and seemed sort of fuzzy. I'm really not sure how else to describe it, but I thought that I had fallen asleep and sort of woke up, only this time I couldn't move at all. As I said before, at this point in time I had never even heard of sleep paralysis. During this experience though, I seriously thought that I was dying. I assumed I was having a heart attack or something, and something was seriously wrong. Panic set in, and I began panting and trying as hard as I could to move and get up, with no success obviously. Next thing I know, a completely black silhouette of a person moved into the room from the door. It was pitch black, like as if a person was wearing a bodysuit of Vanta black. The only thing that was not completely black was its head, which appeared to be sort of black-white film static, like from an old TV. It entered the room, stood at the foot of the bed for some time, before I was able to move, and then it just suddenly disappeared. I immediately grabbed my cell phone and punched in what I had experienced in hopes of figuring out what the heck had just happened to me. This is when I learned about sleep paralysis and the shadow people that people see and experience. After that incident, I began having trouble sleeping, as I was extremely fearful of experiencing it again. I really cannot remember how much later, although all of these experiences happened within about a year's time, but eventually it happened again. This time I was visiting my siblings, living with my mother. I was in a bedroom with my younger brother who was playing a PlayStation. There was a queen bed in the room that I was laying in, and a twin mattress on the floor beside it that my brother was sitting on. Some time had passed before the last sleep paralysis experience that I had, but right before falling asleep, I felt that familiar feeling of heaviness. I tried to get up, but it was too late. I couldn't move, but again I could see the room. I assume my eyes were open, but I guess I really have no idea. But I could see my brother still sitting on the mattress toward my feet. I tried as hard as I could to yell his name, to get him to shake me in an attempt to get me out of this sleep paralysis. But this didn't work at all. With a view of the bedroom door, one after another, 4 pitch-black shadow figures entered the room. This time, they were pitch black head to toe, no static face. They slowly gathered around the bed that I was in, likely within arm's reach. They stood there for some time as I was experiencing, even to this day, the most horrifying experience that I have ever had. I mean, pure terror. Then, they all spoke. when they did, it was like a booming, omniscient voice that didn't seem to come from them specifically, but just emanated from all around me. The only words that they spoke were, "The seen cannot be unseen." They then disappeared, and I awoke more terrified than I have ever been. Now, I've never really told this story before, and there were a couple of more experiences, I guess you could say, of sleep paralysis that I have experienced, but I did not see anything during those. Nothing like this, at least. I'm really hoping that it doesn't happen again, but quite honestly, I'm pretty fearful that it will. If you guys have any advice as to what I should do about any of this, or what this might be exactly, then please feel free to let me know, because I would genuinely appreciate the interaction. I lost my father in 2021. He passed away at the age of 56. He worked at a factory where they made paint. Due to his field, he developed scar tissue in his lungs. He had pulmonary fibrosis. He fought for 5 years, but during COVID he got bronchitis and he passed away. Shortly after his passing, I dreamed of my dad one more time prior to this time, and he was laying on his bed smiling with a thumbs up. When he appeared to me, he didn't say anything, and it was more like a feeling that I knew that it was him. He looked really young though, and he glowed, not in a movie or cartoon way, but in a sort of out-of-this-world kind of way. I ended up crying in my sleep, and my mum woke me up. I was apparently sobbing. After that time, I dreamed of him again about a year later, but this time it was different. I remember that I was in my living room, and my dad had his lazy boy recliner in the corner of the living room. That recliner was honestly his sanctuary. He spent most of his time in that chair, and I can remember seeing my dad rocking in his chair with his oxygen tank right next to him. Because of his pulmonary fibrosis, he has a very distinct cough as well. In my dream, my dad was weak and sick. He was rocking back and forth and coughing. As I got closer, his cough got more exaggerated until it eventually turned into this evil, loud sort of laugh. I also remember saying, "You're not my dad," and trying to wake up. Then I realized that I was sort of stuck. I had sleep paralysis. My mum was laying next to me. It was really hard on her losing my dad, so for the first year I moved in with her and slept with her because she hadn't slept alone in like over 30 years. But it was at this point that my mother apparently felt someone get on the bed, but obviously there was nothing there, so out of fear she actually woke me up. Obviously, neither of us had spoken to each other, so this is weirdly coincidental. When she did wake me up though, she was absolutely terrified, and she said that she felt and saw the imprint of something climbing onto the bed. A while back, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, around 2009 maybe, when I was just a child, my family went to the Dominican Republic for a spring break, and we stayed in Santo Domingo. It was an amazing trip, don't get me wrong, but I only really recall a single memory from the whole vacation. I walked into my parents' room in the rental house, which was just beside the indoor balcony, to get a swimsuit to change into. As I was walking out, I distinctly remember a creature of some sort crossed the gap between the double doors, only visible for about a second, and me being so young, decided to run back to my parents instead of chasing it. Neither of them saw it. Now, I recall it even more strongly though, because I drew it multiple times afterwards as a kid. I remember it being 3 to 4 feet tall, white with short hair all over. It had human arms and hands and feet, but a head with a protruding mouth and nose. Strangest of all, its legs went backwards in a similar way to most animals, despite it walking on its two hind legs. I've never heard a similar story to this anywhere, so I am wondering if someone can help me. It's been in the back of my mind for at least a decade now, and I would really like to figure out what this might be. So I'm 17, and this encounter happened all the way back when COVID just started. I stayed at my grandparents' mansion at the time because my mother was working abroad. I stayed there for like 6 months, and I felt uncomfortable and paranoid every day that I was in there. At November 13th, my grandma went outside to buy some groceries, while my grandpa went to the other house to drink with his other friends. That's what Filipinos do. So, being the child that I was, I decided to explore the mansion a bit. While I saw some stuff that was unnerving and kind of creepy, I didn't find them as creepy as what I saw upstairs. You see, my grandparents always had a thing for dolls. But when I saw the shadow of a little girl around the corner though, at first I thought that I was just seeing a big doll, but when I got around there, I obviously didn't. Instead, I saw the shadow of something, but I didn't see the shadow being connected to anything. What I mean is that there was just this shadow there. The shadows occur because something shines on them or something like that, right? But I didn't see anything casting a shadow, just there was a shadow there. At this, I became pretty scared and I immediately went back downstairs. But that wasn't the last time that I saw it. You see, on the same month in the middle of the night, I needed to go to the bathroom. The room that I was staying in was quite far away from the bathroom, so I had to walk for like 2 minutes or so, and because I was paranoid, I grabbed my phone and opened the flashlight. I got to the bathroom normally, and when I got out, and as I was making my way back to my room, I saw that same shadow again, but it wasn't the same shadow this time. This one looked like a little boy's shadow. This time I just stayed still and I looked at it while my phone's flashlight went off because my phone was getting hot. And unfortunately, even after thinking about this encounter for so long, I really just cannot remember what happened after that. Maybe it was because it was just such a long time ago, but really, it's just black after that. I did tell my grandma about this, but she didn't believe me and just sort of laughed it off. I know that this sounds kind of like a generic thing because it happened when I was so young and all these sorts of stories do, but I just can never forget the terror that I felt when I saw those shadows. And I would really like to remember exactly what happened that night. So, if some of you guys listen to all of the stories here, then you'll know that someone has been watching my place for some time now. This is a bit of an ongoing drama, and I honestly wish that I wasn't sharing this right now. I've had weeks of peace with only the ping of my overactive camera system alerting me to people passing by with their dogs or children. Honestly, I thought everything was fine, and maybe this isn't the most dramatic update, but it was just another scary tick mark to add to the list. So, I got an alert to activity outside the garage. Given my garage door crowbar banger, that's the one that I always pay most attention to, honestly. I keep weird hours and I hadn't been on my phone, so at first I thought my dad was leaving for work. But then I saw the recording it made instance later. This man walked boldly up to the car in the driveway, my mum's at the moment, and tried the handles of the doors before running off. I called the police with a good description and told them that I have video about it, but my town doesn't have a large police force and some of them are just like any department, I guess, shady and a bit lazy. I've rewatched it so many times now and he has the same build as the man that I saw at the garage before. That's obviously not definitive, but Now I have more details about his description that I couldn't see before due to the lack of lighting and cameras and all that. I'm still pretty shaken up about this, even though he didn't try to get in or anything. I was outside not even half an hour ago, though in the fenced backyard portion. This just feels all wrong to me too because, well, nothing is solved. And even though it might be unrelated, is that actually probable? That one person and or their house would attract so much trouble from completely different individuals? It doesn't seem likely, right? Also, just to add some information, this man saw the camera before he ran. I don't know if he would have tried more had he not, but it has like a little red and blue light on the front part that rotates a full circle. It's large and lights up a bit. That's why I thought that they deterred the creep so far. And we were eventually visited by the police, who very kindly didn't ring the bell. Parents asleep have been texted all about this, but I gave all the evidence and they actually found the guy. I don't know if we're absolute sure it was the same man that banged on my garage or watched from the window, but I do know that they caught this guy, and my video footage will be used in court, I guess. I don't know. Quite honestly, I was really doubtful that they'd actually send someone due to the chastising text message. Non-emergency was closed and all that, so I called the regular line. As I mentioned earlier in some other videos about this incident, my dad had told me that there had been a lot of car thefts in the neighborhood. But the weirdest part to me that I think I must be imagining or something is that he looks, from the somewhat fuzzy camera stills, quite a bit like the guy that I had a one-night stand with a couple of months ago, right around when all of this started. I really didn't think that it could be him, but I'm hoping that since I'm supposed to get the ring footage to the officer tomorrow, I don't have access to that one right now, I can ask who this person actually is. I'm really hoping that it's all over now. All of this has given me a lot of comfort. And unless I'm wrong and there's a second person, which is pretty unlikely, this should be my last update on, thankfully, a closed chapter. I would really like your opinions on this situation and what you think could be done. So, to begin, no one lives there now. We just come there from time to time. This house was built in the 1800s, and since it's been renovated, it's still in place like it was originally built, but it looks a bit different. It's from my husband and his brother, and they got it from their grandmother. Grandmother and her husband got it from an old lady that lived there. They made a deal with her to take care of her, and in return they would inherit a house. Everyone in the village always said that that lady was apparently a witch. The lady passed away and they got the house, and after Granddad died, Grandma lived there alone. Grandpa died in his 60s and Grandma died when she was 99 years old. She always said, though, that there must be something in the house that's not from this world. She would always hear weird noises. She invited priests for blessings and hoped that it would cleanse the house, but nothing ever really seemed to help. Now, my husband and his brother, they have some crazy stories from that house. When they went to sleep, they heard steps, and Alexa would go off many times with loud music. Their rooms have one wall that they share, and my husband saw black shadows in the hallway often. His dog one time jumped from the bed, started barking at the door, and was in a lot of distress. She was shaking with fear, and then the door of the closet opened, and she just wouldn't come out of there. His brother, whenever he was there alone, when he goes to sleep, feels like something is always choking him. There were a lot of weird things like that. One time when they renovated, they decided to move some bricks that were in the garden for some 40 years or so ago, and they found bones beneath them. The dog took one of them and chewed on it until my husband could take it away from her, and she died 3 months after that from intestinal perforation. Coincidence, maybe? I don't know, but it's a bit weird. There's a lot of other things, but I think you get the picture, and I'm wondering what we could do about this. Is the house cursed or haunted, or I don't know, is there something in there, demonic? And if there is, well, what can we do about it? This happened to me back in 2008 to early 2010s. When I was 11, I met a girl who was the same age as me, 6th grade. She and I weren't in the same class until high school, but we were in the same school, so we saw each other often. By the middle of the 6th grade, things got a little bit creepy. Somehow, she was everywhere every time I had an extra class, including every time that I had to switch from another schedule to another one. My entire life, I never gave her my private information, but somehow she just knew. Unfortunately, I had reported it to the teacher or faculty members, but they brushed it off by warning as a ruse, because I didn't have enough evidence to prove that it was actually her. What's worse, we weren't allowed to give any electronic device sort of information, like phones for example, for pieces of evidence against her, except calculators for maths and physics or whatever. Weird, right? Anyway, this bothered me for a long time. She even shared the same home economics class and swimming lessons as mine during the 8th grade, but yet again not the same group. Even in 9th grade, she still kept following me non-stop, despite me warning her to leave me alone. After I graduated, I left for high school to start over, and even though I forgot about her until the middle of October of 2012, she was back again. My skin honestly turned pale and my heart began to race when I saw her. I was in a panic. I mean, this girl, how did she even know that I was in the high school that I was in? I mean, again, I didn't leak my information anywhere, and certainly not to her. Once again, she wouldn't leave me alone though, and this is where things start to get a bit worse. You see, she guilt-tripped me into befriending her to let her use my belongings without my permission, and despite her softer manner, it was definitely a red flag to begin with that I should have avoided sooner. Another time, she overheard me and my classmate having a conversation about my wanting a key charm that my classmate had. The next day, she attacked me after I took a seat in the class because she knew that I wanted something that she didn't. Again, really strange behavior, but this incident caught the attention of the principal this time in my high school, and the principal recapped the whole situation by writing a statement report. I ended up having to rewrite the whole thing twice because of grammar errors and all that, and by the third, the principal had made a decision. She was suspended for a week, but that didn't do much. She returned after a week and accused me of her suspending, which honestly I wasn't even involved with in her drama and all that. I mean, I didn't have any other choice but to report my statement. Once again too, she guilt-tripped me for other reasons by hypocritically calling me for being a terrible friend, and she even went as far as to destroy some of my belongings and supplies. I called her out on that, but she pretended that she didn't remember it. Worse too, she framed a student for having a torn notebook that she destroyed, and yet she refused to admit her mistakes. That was my last straw, as it honestly made my blood boil a bit, but I didn't want to show my anger as she gave me a watch in exchange for money, which turns out she swindled it and got away with it. But in all of these situations, half of my peers and teachers witnessed these incidents and warned me that I should end my friendship with her, that she wasn't my friend, just saw me as a pawn and manipulated me by taking advantage of my kindness and trust. We were still in the same high school, mind you, but I sort of quietly, outright, not to be close with her again, started distancing myself. That is, until early December of 2012, because that was the last time that I saw her, and I guessed that she was expelled after the last warning from one of my peers. I felt relieved, but I'll never forget what she did to not only me, but to the other half of my peers as well. It took me nearly to the end of high school to really realize that she was indeed not a very good friend, and her attitude was sort of sociopathic and very creepy as well. That was, in the end, the reason why I ended things with her for good as well. Luckily, I didn't give her my phone number or address or anything, since that wasn't allowed in the school and we had moved by this point. I managed to avoid that red flag, I guess, which I am very grateful for. It's been some time since this incident took place. After I finished my high schooling in 2015, I'm almost 27 and currently have a job, and this experience has definitely made it difficult to trust someone or befriend them again. It was a weird time for me, and last I heard, she was in trouble with the law, and yeah, again, definitely a red flag that I managed to dodge. A lot of weird things have been happening around my place, but almost every incident is possibly explained by something normal, I guess. Like my bedroom door closing gently on its own, but my window was open, so it could have been that, I suppose, even though there was no wind blowing that night. But every situation is sort of like this. Like, for instance, I hear floorboards squeaking on my stairs when no one is upstairs or anywhere near there. But it is an old house and noises happen, right? I often hear or feel someone walking into the room while my back is turned. I look back fully expecting to see my son or my husband trying to sneak up on me and startle me, but there's no one there. I also have had the sensation of someone gently grabbing me when nobody is around. That's been happening since I was a kid. I'm currently in my late 30s. But there's some things that have also completely freaked me out. I was standing in the hallway talking to my son one day, and I noticed this shadow on the wall above the doorway next to us. I assumed it was caused from the sunlight coming in through the bathroom window behind him. The shadow was moving like my son was while talking to me. But then he walked away and, unbelievably, the shadow stayed there. At first I thought it was actually just my shadow, but I moved and the shadow stayed. It was still moving about like it was when my son was there, speaking to me. I tried putting my hands up in front of the window, to block the sunlight, but I couldn't get my actual shadow to reach that high up on the wall, no matter where I stood. The window is unusually high up on the wall. You definitely need a ladder to see into the bathroom from the outside. I actually recorded a video of the shadow to show my husband at the time too. I could have sworn that I saved it to my Google Photos, but it's not there at the moment, so I have to look around for it. But the incident that freaked me out the most was when I was opening the bathroom door to exit the bathroom. The door suddenly swung open so hard that I honestly thought that my son was messing with me, and that he grabbed the door from the outside and yanked it from my hand, swinging it wide open. I looked immediately through the small opening on the hinged side of the door to catch him in the act of trying to scare me, yelling, "Nice try." But when I did, and when I went out there and looked around, nobody was there. So, am I just being paranoid, or is there something going on here? So, I really don't know what's going on, and I don't know who to talk to, and I'm not necessarily rolling in dough to hire a psych or a doctor or something. I guess I just want some advice. I don't know if I'm going crazy. I want to know if anything like this has happened to anyone else, because I just don't want to feel alone anymore. So here's what happened. I was sleeping, and I think I got sort of stuck in between sleeping and awake. I genuinely thought that I was awake, and I tried to get up, but all of a sudden I just couldn't move. Now, I've had sleep paralysis before, but this time was completely different. I was 100% conscious and lucid, and at first I wasn't really scared, I guess. I just sort of laid there. I remember just thinking, how long is this going to be like this for? And so after a few minutes, I tried to get up again, and I realized that I can actually move my arms, all of my body parts, but sort of not at the same time. Imagine like a phantom sort of limb syndrome, but the difference here is that I don't have any missing limbs. This is going to sound weird, I know, but I could have sworn that I could move everything, but my real body wasn't moving at all. And the strangest thing out of all of this experience is that I could see my hands when I moved them, while my real arms and hands remained sort of motionless next to my body. So I'm literally waving my arms around, and I could see them, but they were sort of transparent. And so at this point I begin to panic, thinking that I'm actually dead or something. My knees were up in the air, and my feet were on the bed with the rest of my body, with the blanket on me from the waist down. I had my iPad with a case that had a stand on it placed on my stomach when I originally fell asleep. I grabbed my iPad and put it next to me. I felt the case close together in the back of it, and heard it close even, and saw it, but it sort of felt lighter and was like I took the soul out of my iPad because it was also transparent when I grabbed it. I did that 2 more times, and my real iPad remained on my stomach. Only when I moved my hands and arms I could see them, and when I stopped they were sort of invisible completely. Anyway, so I'm laying there for like 10 minutes, and I started to get bored, I guess, and wanted to move my hands around again and watch what was happening. I started to touch my face, and it felt sort of squishy and just weird. The next thing I did was I interlocked my fingers like in a cartoon where someone would sort of crackle their fingers. And the second that I did that, something big crawled from my right shoulder onto my body and bit onto my hand. Weirdly though, it didn't hurt, like bad, but I felt it. It felt like needle teeth, like a cat maybe, and it stayed on me, biting into me. When it ran across my body is when I could see it, and whatever it was humanoid but moved like a primate. It had long, very skinny arms, and ran like a monkey, like with its knees next to its shoulders. This was a matter of seconds, mind you, so when it bit down it felt like maybe 19 seconds or so, which is long because I couldn't move my head and I could only move my arms, and they were only my spirit arms or whatever. Again, I want to remind everyone that this wasn't a dream. I was 100% conscious and lucid. I couldn't move my physical body, obviously, but I was thinking and looking around for like 15 to 20 minutes before this happened. For some reason, I have no idea why I did this, but I reached with my other hand and I grabbed the back of, well, whatever this thing is, its head, and it felt like short hair, like a pit bull almost, like the scruff of the back of a dog's neck or head. And I saw it look at me at this point, and it had dark holes where its eyes should have been. I don't know if there were eyes there or not, because it was only for a split second that I saw it, because I think out of shock I just let go, and I watched it run behind my legs, and then it peeked around my legs and looked at me. Then when it stopped moving, it disappeared, because when it moved I could see it, like my arms. After that though, I must have broken out of whatever this was, because all of a sudden I could move again and everything felt normal. Weirdly though, I could still feel the bite on my hand for like 15 minutes, the sort of pain and pressure of it. Honestly, I just sat there and I was like, what the heck just happened? I still have no idea what any of that was. It's never happened to me again, and it's never happened to me before that either. It was completely random and out of the blue, and I don't know if I'm going crazy, like I said, if I need to see a psych or a doctor or something, but whatever it was, it happened, and it's really freaking me out. My mother and I are very much into the paranormal and have been for a very long time. Before my son was born, in fact, the two of us would go on paranormal investigations together alongside of some professionals. We also enjoyed watching all of the paranormal programs on television, including the reenactments, documentaries, and investigation programs or shows. Anyway, one night, just like most evenings, my mother and I were sat on the couch watching Paranormal Hotel. While we were watching this, there was a comment made by one of the paranormal experts that they comment on stories, and they explained why you should never mess around with Ouija boards, demons, or something along those lines. I turned to my mum with that and said, I wouldn't mess with them, would you? And jokingly and pretty foolishly, she looked at me and said, oh yeah, I would. I knew that she was joking, but I quickly warned her not to joke like that, as it could be seen as taunting by any spirits or entities, despite us never experiencing anything in our home, or having any reason to think our home could be haunted. With all that I knew and had researched, I just wanted to be cautious, I guess. I then proceeded to tell her how spirits or entities can use electricity to come through to our realm. My mum looked at me and she shook her head, saying that she didn't believe that that was possible, but I told her again not to speak like that. Now, here is where things get a little bit scary. Not even 1 minute later, as we sat there watching the TV, my upper left arm began to burn, and it was like nothing that I'd ever felt before. I knew in that moment that this was not normal, and so with that I looked at my mum and told her that my arm was burning, and that I thought that I'd been scratched. I pulled up the sleeve to my t-shirt, and lo and behold, a large red scratch was appearing against my skin, becoming darker as we watched it. However, this scratch was in the shape of a large Z, like a perfect Z. Myself and my mother were pretty frightened by this. My partner was in the home at the time, and I instantly went into the room that he was in and showed him my arm, and he was also in a little bit of shock by that. As well as being really frightened to the point that I was shaking, I was also angry that something had entered our home and caused me harm like this, especially when I wasn't the one who made the joke. I called out to who or whatever was with us, telling it that it was not welcome in our home, that it had no right to harm me, and that it had to leave, but my mum also apologizing for her joke. And then we turned the television off. After this incident, I have never been harmed by anything unseen again. It was honestly a really weird and terrifying thing that I've experienced. I have no idea how it got into our home, or if it still lingers, or if it took my words and left. I also want to stress that the Z that appeared on my skin, it came out of absolutely nowhere. Like, there is no logical explanation as to how this happened. I was just sitting there, and one moment it wasn't there, and the next it was there. Mind you too, it was pretty deep, and like I said, it was in the shape of a perfect Z. In other words, there's just no way that I or anyone else in the home caused this. I did want to know though if anyone else here has experienced anything similar. Does anyone have any idea of what or who may have scratched me? Does the Z that was scratched onto my skin have any significance? Like I said, there was no way that I could have scratched myself. I was sat with my hands down by my sides watching TV. Nobody was near me, and the shoulder that received the scratch was on the side of the couch by the wall. So, it is honestly just completely unexplainable. That is, if you discount the paranormal. I'm 29 years old and a quadriplegic, wheelchair-bound, due to an accident when I was 14, leaving me paralyzed with no feeling or movement below my nipples. After years of consideration, to make my life easier and more stress-free, I decided to get a colostomy. It made the most sense for me to do it, to make ease of life. For this surgery, I would need to do a 48-hour fast before my colonoscopy, and then the next day I would have my colostomy and could still not have any food up until the surgery, which means that I roughly went 4 days without eating. Now, besides my surgery getting pushed back 3 hours, the surgery itself went well, and I awoke and was conscious, and everything went as planned. I would need to be hospitalized that evening, and the next day as well, and possibly a third, depending on how the nurses felt. That night, as my day winded down and my visitors would leave, I would spend the evening watching TV on my phone until I just got tired enough to try and fall asleep. I cannot feel that part of my body, so I wasn't in any pain or anything, but they were giving me small doses of pain medicine, just to keep me comfortable and help me to get some sleep. My room was dark with just the lights from my IV machine and the crack of the blinds from my window illuminating the room from the parking lot streetlights from the hospital. I would have some trouble sleeping that night, mostly feeling like I would sleep 5 or 10 minutes and then suddenly just awaken, but then would quickly fall back asleep just for the same process to happen again and again. This would go on until about 3 in the morning. I would eventually fall asleep once again, but then suddenly I awoke, but this time it felt like I was awakened for a purpose, or maybe a better way to describe this is that I felt like I was being watched. When I awoke up laying in my hospital bed, something out of my right peripheral caught my attention. I would turn my head to the right and see a very tall, at least 10-foot tall, silhouette sitting in the hospital chair next to my window. Sitting down, this figure was so tall his head was almost to the ceiling. I would close my eyes and reopen them, as if to make my vision clear, as I didn't know what I was looking at. After doing that, the tall figure was still sitting there, and it seemed like he was looking at me, although he had no discernible eyes or facial features. Oddly enough, I was not scared, I guess, nor did I feel uncomfortable. In fact, almost quite the opposite, as it almost seemed like it was there to comfort me. I would look at the figure and say hello. In the fraction of a second, almost as if I missed him making a move, he was suddenly standing at the side of my bed, towering over me looking down. It's at this point where there must be some time missing or something, because the next thing I know, I'm laying flat on my back, still, but in a room that is completely white with no walls, no source of light, but very well illuminated. I seem to be laying on a piece of hard rock similar to granite. When I look up, there are now 2 black figures, both the same size with the same body structure. What was really weird though was that I felt I knew which one had taken me to this new place, and what one I had not had any confrontation with yet. At this point, I'm still pretty calm and not scared or feeling any harm will be done to me or anything. As I'm lying there, I turn to the first figure and ask him, "Is everything okay?" To which he will reply a simple yes, followed by the second figure saying to me, "We are just mending you." Then the first figure would pull a silver dome with a sort of bright shining light beaming down over the top of my head. This is where I have my second lapse in time, until this dome is pulled away from my face, that is. Once I awaken, I turn to the first figure, who I felt that I had a better connection with, or possibly just felt like that's who I should be speaking to. I asked him what was the purpose of this. He doesn't answer, but the second figure turns towards me and says, "It's that you have a new purpose." This is where my third lapse of time happens, and I'm floating through the foggy air from outside through my hospital window back into my bed. Almost as soon as I'm back in my bed, I was asleep. I would then sleep until 8:30 in the morning, and immediately when I woke up, this is the first thing that I thought about. And it felt so real, nothing like any dream that I've ever had, and I can recall every part of this experience, apart from the time lapses, obviously. Immediately, I would Google the definition of mending, a word which I would most likely never use in my life. Obviously, it means repair, to return to health and heal, improve an unpleasant situation, things of this nature. After this, I would call my wife and tell her the story of what I called being abducted by shadow people. Both of us were really confused on what the meaning of this was, but we both feel that it was real and not a dream. I also don't believe that it was a hallucination based on the pain medicine that I was on, as it was such a low dose and it was nothing that should really cause anything like this. Plus, I remember everything so vividly. The figures, though, both of them were very tall, at least 10 feet, and both were pitch black with no human features, that I could distinguish at least, other than the shape of their body. I remember seeing no fingers or nose or any facial features for that matter. It was more or less just a huge shadow. I don't necessarily know if they talked back to me or if I heard their voice telepathically, mainly because there really was no mouth. As I stated before, though, they didn't scare me or make me feel uncomfortable. In fact, it's almost like I was in a bliss of comfort when I was around them. For some reason, though, I do feel like the second figure was in charge, or the boss, mainly because he seemed to answer for the first figure certain questions, and seemed like he was leading the process, I guess. As I stated before too, I never saw them walk towards me, or necessarily move. Other than turning their body, it almost seemed like the silver dome wasn't even pulled down over my head via an arm or anything. Both of their voices were very different though, but both also very monotone. Since having this experience, I have not seen the shadow figures anymore, but the memory is still very strong and vivid in my mind, almost as if I am never to forget it, in fact. At the time of sharing this, it's now been a little over 2 months since it happened, and my wife recommended that I share it here to see if anyone has any similar situations or would maybe be able to make light of what happened, in fact. I did tell my nurse later that day about my experience, and she just said that that's creepy and that most people don't hallucinate off of that pain medicine, especially at the dose that I was given. Overall, it wasn't a bad experience, I guess. In fact, I actually feel really good about it, even if it was a little bit creepy. And as I stated before, I was not scared or uncomfortable at any moment. So, any comments or input is very much appreciated. So, this is not my encounter, it's my friend Q's. Q lives in a suburban place. She told me what was happening, crying on the phone one day. I was at work and she was not, so I kept texting her to ask why she was not there. She finally texted back telling me that something had woke her up in the middle of the night and she needed to call me about it. On call, Q told me what happened. Her mum was playing with her crystals like she normally does. Even Q thinks her mum is crazy, but then a few hours later, when Q was sitting on the couch, she heard banging from upstairs. She said that she went to go and check it out, but nobody was there. This obviously creeped her the heck out, so she ran back downstairs and found one of her siblings. When she went to bed, she fell asleep, but then she awoke to what she described as a shadow-looking thing. It apparently had no eyes or anything, but it felt like it was staring at her. She couldn't move out of fear, she said. Then she said that she closed her eyes and started praying and opened them to see that it was gone and she could move again. When she told me this, I told her that it was probably just paralysis or something to that effect, but she told me that she had many other encounters with it, and apparently she even had a name for it. Anyway, a few days after the whole call, she came up to me and started venting about how she was so scared to go to sleep, and even scared to go in dark rooms. One time she was trying to fall asleep, and then one of her sisters started screaming. Q got up and went to go and see what it was, and she said that she could feel something off in her sister's room, and said that she thought that she saw a glimpse of the shadow thing again. She asked what was wrong with her sister. Now, all of her siblings were in the room with her, and her sister told them all that she saw a shadow thing in her room. She said that she felt like it was staring at her. Q then went and asked her mum about this, and her mum confessed to recently bringing in a demonic spirit into their house. She said that she was playing with her crystals and said that she thought that she brought something from another dimension in. A few days after this incident, her mum and her siblings could feel something watching them, and sometimes even touching them too. Like, one time when Q was alone at home, she was watching TV. She was watching a horror film apparently, and right when the scary monster thing's face was about to be shown, her power went completely out. It was around noon when it happened, and everything just went completely dark. She remembers passing out on the couch suddenly and seeing something right when she was about to fall out. She then awoke and found a really large scratch on her back. She was obviously scared and annoyed as well because, well, there was blood on the couch and she had to clean it up. She showed me it though, and it goes to the bottom of her back to the side of her torso, on her back. And quite honestly, upon hearing all of this, it scared the heck out of me. I'll try and update the situation with Q, and I'll see if I can try and communicate with whatever this is. But can anyone let me know what Q should do? And can anyone tell me if Q's mum did bring something forth? We have tried a Ouija board and we talked to a few things. It really wasn't scary, and Q took her fingers off for a second and we could hear a bang come from upstairs. We asked it a few questions like, why are you here and what do you want? I'm now sharing this in the dark and I'm hearing things, and I'll do a more detailed update at some point in the future, but quite honestly, I just want all this to end because I just have a really weird feeling that something is wrong. A few years ago now, I was in a relationship with a guy named James, male and 20, for about 3 years. In the beginning, he was wonderful too. He supported me during my chemotherapy, was kind and funny, a bit crazy but not in a creepy way. He helped me surviving through my sickness, and I really wouldn't be alive without him right now. But the last year of our relationship, he changed. He wanted to try new experiences and began taking drugs. I didn't know that he was an addict until our breakup. He was totally different though. Jealous, a liar, sometimes really harsh with me, and he cheated on me before our breakup too. To be honest, I really had pity for him. So after the breakup, I'd spent 6 months helping him. I was a student, he was always at my home, in pain trying to fight his addiction. And after a while of trying to tell him to stop, after a month in an institute, he started drugs again, like 3 hours after leaving. It's a sad story, but it gets worse. You see, during our relationship, I chose my university to be close to him, so I sort of was a bit isolated. No friends, no family, no one. But 1 month after cutting the rope, something strange happened, and everything began with my cat. So one night, I went out to see a movie. On my way home, it started raining, and I remembered that I'd left my cat outside. My cat is beautiful and nice, but hates water, pretty much like every cat does, I guess, but I started running to get home early, and when I opened the door, my cat was on my sofa. At first I thought, oh, what an idiot I am. The cat wasn't outside at all. But then I hugged him, and my cat was completely wet. That felt very weird to me at the time. I mean, I was like, what the heck? And then I thought maybe my neighbors could have opened my door to let him in or something. So I just sort of forgot about it. 1 week later, I began to realize that some of my clothes were missing, particularly my underwear. I do have ADHD though, so I blame myself for losing my own clothes at this point. But then the same thing happened with my food and some plates as well. Like one of my favorite bowls disappeared. It was a student's apartment, so not big enough to lose that many things really, but again, I just sort of blame myself. I even called myself a magician at one point, joking about how I can make anything disappear without even trying. But I completely lost it when I came back from my parents' house and discovered my place totally changed. There was even the neighbor's mail on my table with mysterious headphones, my photos on the wall were upside down, and a black umbrella was on my bed too. I didn't even own an umbrella at this point. It was honestly very scary seeing this. So I called my mum and then the police. Yes, always mum first, right? The officer was nice, but told me that really there was nothing that they could do, except taking my complaint, that is. I didn't know who was doing this to me, and so there really wasn't much to go off of. My ex never had my keys, and even when I said that I don't want to talk to him anymore, I stayed nice, and so I didn't think that anybody wanted to hurt me or was scared of me or anything. I mean, for what? Joking? Whatever the case, I slept with a knife for like 2 years after this. My neighbors started getting scared too, because we had a common basement and someone was breaking the door during the night. We found supplies in it even, like a blanket and a plate, not mine by the way. I had chains on the inside of my door, so I felt secure when I was inside, but I was scared to leave and come back to see my stuff all missing again. A few weeks go by, and in the evening I had to go to the grocery store. It took me like 30 minutes to get there and back. When I came back home, there was a note on my bedroom's mirror. Nothing was written on it, just a smiley face, and obviously that absolutely freaked me out, and I left immediately. Again, I called the police, and they told me that I should just leave the note and forget about it. Mind you, I didn't even have those kind of little sticky yellow paper sort of leaflet things, so I don't see how they were not concerned by this. In any case, I stayed with my mum for a week, spent all of my money on a camera and post for help on social media because I felt completely distraught. But after that, weirdly enough, there was just nothing. In the meantime though, James's sister came to talk to me, saying that one of my favorite jackets was at their parents' house. I remembered wearing this jacket after saying stop to James, so again, I've got ADHD and I might have just forgotten it. But I didn't see James's parents for like 8 months at this time, so I found that pretty difficult to believe. Also, I suspected my neighbor who had one of my keys and was feeding my cat when I wasn't home, but she was in another country during most of this story, so that just didn't add up either. I talked with James last year about that, and he swore that he'd never done anything that weird, and told me that he was in another rehabilitation center when all of this was happening. Everything stopped after that, and I still don't know who did this or why. Maybe it was my ex, maybe someone else, but I don't really care. I'm just glad that it stopped and I don't have to deal with this anymore. And he is hoping that that was the last of it. So me and my boyfriend were playing video games in our bedroom on my birthday 5 nights ago for probably an hour or so. He was on our bed playing Xbox, I was on my PC, not even a foot away. When we finally got off of our game, we both took our headphones off and he looked at me saying, "Do you want to smoke a bowl?" And I responded with yes, and joined him on our bed. Around 10 seconds after he initially asked to smoke, he went to grab his phone and I was just looking at him. The whole house was silent as it was 11:30. But then, a female-sounding voice, almost identical to mine, but not quite, clear as day, said, "Can we take a bowl?" I wasn't expecting to hear my own voice, so I still don't know if I'm trying to think that it wasn't, but we both heard it, whatever it was. It was only a few words off from what my boyfriend said, so we first thought maybe a recording, a hacker, a device, relay, Alexa, maybe the cops. We truly have been over everything, and it's a dead end every time. It was a different sentence altogether as well, so we got over that option pretty quickly. My boyfriend, had never believed in any type of alternative universe before this, but really it's the only, well, I hate to say it, but logical conclusion. We're both convinced that this was a glitch, and in some other timeline I said that to him instead. It's happened way too many times, me saying that exact phrase, and exact scenario even in the same tone. It's the perfect setup to make us question what actually happened. Was this maybe my past best friend visiting me on my birthday, legitimately wanting to smoke with us? I've been in a hard place ever since she passed in November of 22, begging for communication or really anything from her. So could this possibly have been good reason for spirits to come right in instead? A mimic, a ghost, maybe even a demon? We both got immediate chills and we left the house to my parents' place. I was hotter than I'd ever been in my life that whole night, sweat beating down my face while I was calm days and hours later. I woke up as well to a horrible dream of me and my boyfriend in our own bed at home, and in the dream I woke up, rushed to the end of the bed to see this demon figure, and before I could even react, I was awake at my parents' house, drenched in sweat, shaking. My boyfriend was dead asleep at the time, and I tried to shake him awake, but it took some time before he would wake up, which was really abnormal. Now, I've read about mimics and how they prey on those who are alone by sounding like a loved one or even yourself, but I have yet to find others like this specific scenario. How come we both heard it and then felt the exact same? The odds are almost non-existent on the mental or physical health factor, because even then my boyfriend and I would have, yes, had similar symptoms, but not hallucinate the same. Fast forward to 2 days later though, my boyfriend and I have to fly across the country. We're visiting family. But we tried the best to put this out of our minds. Unfortunately though, I don't think I'll ever live my life the same after that, but I finally let my guard down and thought to myself, nothing can come with me, I'm safe. That was, until we saw them. My boyfriend points out an older lady, very sort of witch-like, the kind you see and just know that they have way too much knowledge, that sort of vibe. But right in front of her I pointed out a man, a spitting image of a demon in human form. He had leather and chains and a cloak cape, dressed in black head to toe, senpaku eyes, very violent looking. He was only staring at me too, in my eyes, and I could literally feel it after I looked away too. It wasn't just him though as well. The witch lady, she was doing it too, until they had to physically turn their heads to continue looking at me. Spooky, right? Well, the weirdest thing though is that my boyfriend, he didn't see the guy. Now, you tell me how in the world he sees this witchy older lady staring at me 2 feet away from the man in front of her and doesn't see him? Once we shared our concerns and agreed that that was definitely not normal, I began to realize that maybe I was losing my mind, or maybe I'm being watched or something. Anyway, the next day, we're out to dinner with my family and I go to use the restroom. I was hesitant because it was scary to me and dark, and I just didn't want to be alone, not even to go pee. I heard my boyfriend joking with my family about how I was scared, so of course I thought that he was the one who came up to the bathroom door and said, "Psst," but in the end, he wasn't. Another thing too, maybe related or not, we just moved into this house 4 months ago, and ever since I've been feeling just really drained, like no energy. My mood has been erratic at times. Maybe I'm vulnerable or something. I'm just really so lost right now, but I'm trying to stay positive. I also want to say that no, we were not just intoxicated or whatever. In the end, we didn't even get my bowl out on my birthday because it spooked us so bad. We also have carbon monoxide detectors in every single room in our house. They're on and working and have been thoroughly checked. No mold, no leaks, and I appreciate the concerns, but unfortunately, that's not the problem that we need solved here. Let me know what you think though. Glitch, ghost, mimic, Loved one? Demon? What do you think? Any feedback is greatly appreciated. We are still very jumbled up over this and don't quite know what to make of the situation. We're heading home now and I'm about to get on a plane, so wish us luck, I guess. I'm 24 now, but this happened when I was around 16. I was usually home alone because my mum worked during the day, and I was hanging out in my room like normal, just taking pictures on my phone, when I hear my mum close the door and walk into the kitchen. I yelled out, "Hi Mum," to which she said hi back. A few minutes go by, but I never saw my mum go into her room, so I walked out into the living room and I didn't see her. I checked the kitchen, her bedroom, and other places, but she just wasn't home. And I never heard her leave again. We had bells on the back of our door. I shrugged it off and went back to my room. I started playing on my phone again when I hear her whisper my name right next to my ear. I freaked out and looked around, but nobody was there. I also had my 2 dogs with me, but they weren't reacting to anything, so I didn't really think too much of it. Once I stopped freaking out, though, I called my mum to confirm that she was still at work, and she was. That actually used to happen a lot at that apartment, where I would hear her voice. Sometimes it would be random and just calling out my name. Other times it was whispering, and it was always freaky. I have a lot more weird paranormal stories from living in that apartment, so I'll definitely share more at some point, but this one, it always gives me goosebumps. Today, someone knocked at the door and I opened it, thinking that it was someone from my parents. And all I can say is that the whole experience was just odd. There was a shorter lady, late 60s, Hispanic woman looking down holding some pamphlets, and a tall, I would say 6'4", Hispanic man with sunglasses and a cap wearing a leather jacket. He seemed strange since it wasn't even a sunny day and didn't even look at me when I opened the door. He stood a few feet back from the woman, looking up at the siding of the building. I looked back at the woman, who was now looking up at me, but still not saying anything. And that was when I noticed her eyes. They were sort of light green or grey, and the pupils were like thin slits. Upon seeing that, I couldn't stop staring. I was sort of frozen, I guess, not comprehending what the heck I was looking at. My toddler ran over to say hello, and instantly I felt afraid, and instinctively closed the door with just my head peeking, and she still hadn't said anything. Usually, Jehovah's Witnesses, those sorts of people, will have started talking by now. Maybe she hesitated to speak as she saw that I was uncomfortable or something. After staring at each other for what seemed like forever, I forced myself to break eye contact and look down at her hand to see what she was trying to peddle. They were brochures of pictures of Jesus, and she stuttered in Spanish that she wanted to make an invitation as she flipped through the brochures in her hand, but never actually handed one to me. I would have taken it to be nice, but she didn't, so after a short pause, I politely said no thank you, and I closed the door. I looked out of the window just after doing this, and I didn't see them go to any other houses or anything. In fact, they just sort of, disappeared. I thought it was very strange that they would drive to my neighborhood, knock on my door, and then drive away without trying any other houses. For all I know, she was probably just a normal old Jehovah's Witness lady, but I've never in my life seen or heard of anyone with eyes like that, and honestly was terrified. Has anyone else seen someone with eyes like this? I googled it and came across coloboma, but it looks nothing like what her eyes look like. I mean, they were literally like thin slits. Contacts maybe, but that's weird for a woman in her late 60s to be wearing cat or snake contacts like that. I don't know, something about the whole situation just felt very off. This happened to me and my partner in September of 2023. So, we were hanging out with our two friends, husband and wife. Their names are John and Mary. They decided to camp at Todd Lake Recreation Center, which is in George Washington National Forest, and invited us to spend time at their campsite, have a few beers, relax by the campfire, etc. My partner and I decided that we weren't up for overnight camping, but we were down to hang out for a bit. The recreation center was only 45 minutes from home, so we thought that we could drive if we didn't have but a few drinks, ate food, and chilled for a couple of hours. We get there at around 4:30 p.m. and we have camp snacks, sandwiches, chips, nothing special, and some alcoholic seltzers. We wander down to the lake and we let their dogs swim, and then we decide to head back to the campsite and start up a fire. I knew that we weren't staying the night, so I kept track of how many drinks I had and the food that I ate to ensure that I was suitable for the drive later. In total, I had 5 seltzers the entire night, hours mind you. And not to sound like an alcoholic or anything, but 5 seltzers do not explain what happened to us that night. I can definitely handle my alcohol and am responsible while drinking by pacing myself, eating food and drinking water in between each beverage. Anyway, we were hanging by the fire with John and Mary, and the next thing you know, John says, "Hey, do you guys want to walk down to the lake?" And we respond, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." The campsite was a short walking path to the lake, probably half a mile away. It should only take a few minutes to get there really, but this is when things get a bit weird. I look at my cell phone and see that it's 8:30 p.m. and decide to put my phone in the car before we walk down to the lake because, well, I don't want to lose it. But the next thing I knew, I woke up in the woods, passed out on the ground on a trail with my partner in the middle of George Washington National Forest, an hour away from their campsite, and John and Mary were nowhere to be found. My partner, he was on his back with his head turned to the side, and I was laying halfway on the moss and the other half on him with my head turned to the side, almost as if we were placed perfectly. We were also lost and both felt extremely confused and sick as well. We both started throwing up and had to take breaks walking out to try and find John and Mary's campsite. It took us an hour to get back, and it appeared that we had hiked an hour outside of the recreation center. We both had zero recollection of how we even got there, why we were both passed out in the middle of the woods at night, and why the heck 5 seltzers with food over a multiple hour span made either one of us to be so sick and lose memory at the same time. My partner was completely disoriented and started screaming for help at one point. I was begging him to be quiet because I felt so sick and had no idea where we were. I guess I just needed a moment to collect myself and get my bearings to try and hike out of our current situation. Something to know about us too is that we are both avid hikers and backpackers and very comfortable outdoors in nature, even alone. However, at that moment, I was so thankful I didn't wake up in the woods at night on a trail alone. Thankfully, he was with me, but the entire time, we both felt like we were being watched as we tried to find our way back. It was really unsettling. I was telling my partner when we were trying to find our way back to the campsite that something just felt very wrong, and when we got back, we needed to get into the car and we needed to leave. I don't know, I felt it in my bones, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what happened. We were both utterly shocked though that we both somehow conveniently blacked out simultaneously like that. And look, I know what you're all thinking. We must have been drugged, right? We felt that too, but why would John and Mary, our supposed friends drug us like that? And why would they drug us and carry us deep into the forest? It just didn't add up. Anyway, we finally made it back to the campsite, and I first opened my car and grabbed my phone to see what the time is. And it was now 2:30 a.m. My heart sank. I mean, how did this even happen? How did it go from 8:30 p.m., when we were walking down to the lake, which was half a mile or less from their campsite, to 2:30 in the morning? Neither of us liked not knowing what happened to us in that lost time. So before we decided to leave, my partner knocked on their tent and said, "Hey, John, we're leaving. What happened, man? We need to get out of here. Something's off." John then replies, "Where's Mary?" And my partner and I both look at each other. Concerned, and say to John, "What do you mean? She's not in the tent with you?" And John replies, "No, I thought that she was with you two." Obviously, that was when we all decided to search for Mary. Now, John said the last thing that he remembered was we were hanging out by the fire and asked if we wanted to go down to the lake, and then hours later, he woke up underneath a picnic table at the campsite, not remembering how he got there. However, something seemed fishy and he was far too relaxed. Eventually, though, we found Mary down the trail to the lake, sort of slumped over, asleep in the woods near the campsite, and neither remembered what happened and why we all ended up in these places. No one can remember what happened for those few hours that just seemed to slip by. At this point, it was misty, dark, and foggy on the mountain, and I was shivering, teeth chattering, feeling sick, and I honestly was just ready to go home. We eventually got in the car and returned to our house, but it took a while to settle enough to sleep that night. When we spoke to John the next morning, he just laughed it off and said, "Haha, maybe we shouldn't drink so much next time that we hang out. I remember all of us hanging by the fire and then mentioning us going down to the lake, but I stayed back to deal with the dog, and you three went down there." John had changed his story from what he said the night before, and something just still didn't sit right with me. The Todd Lake Recreation Center was almost empty. I mean, we only saw one other family camping that night, and they weren't anywhere near our campsite, which was also a bit odd. My partner and I don't feel we drank enough to the point that it would cause us to black out, especially at the same time. So, what happened? We were sore and a little bit cut up, but our only thoughts were that there must have been something paranormal, or maybe they did drug us. Later, though, I started to get flashbacks of memory, and all I remember was John's face on the beach, and then black. So, did aliens abduct us? Was it something from Appalachian folklore like Mothman or some other bizarre creature? Did we actually just drink too much? Did we get drugged? My partner lost his phone that night, so I called the ranger the following Monday, and they said that they found it in the woods, busted up between campsites 5 and 6, but John and Mary were camping at campsite 1. The ranger mailed it back to us because I didn't want to drive back there. I had a horrible pit in my stomach about that. The phone never cut back on, even though the front of the screen was perfectly intact. It was only the back of the phone that was busted up. And I guess that a part of me just doesn't want to know what's on that phone. The next day, my partner was violently ill as well, and I was shivering with teeth chattering and chill bumps all day. Honestly, we probably should have gone to the hospital. But in my 30 years, I've never experienced anything like this. And to this day, we are really skeptical about meeting new friends or having new people enter our lives. Either way, we're both very grateful that we made it home safely that night and that we have each other. But what do you guys think? My partner doesn't have social media, so I blocked John and Mary on mine, and we haven't seen them since. We moved to another state in 2024, not because of this reason, but I've dealt with a lot of PTSD and night terrors since this occurred as well. I now worry that if it was John or both of them, are they doing this to other people as well? And if they are, well, what should I do about it? So I was dating a guy twice my age who I worked at a grocery store with. He had a side job with a morgue where he picks up bodies on call. He takes them to said morgue and does paperwork, tags them, and puts them in the freezer basically. Genuinely too, I thought what he did was pretty admirable, because someone needs to do it, right? And death is a bit of a touchy subject, and if you can handle this sort of thing, then I respect it. He made himself out to be a really great person too, who cares about people and wants to be that guy who can get the hard stuff done in a caring manner. Unfortunately though, he turned out to be far, far from that. So later on I found out that the morgue also does these funeral services and stuff, and because of this there's little rooms with chairs and such, also an office. And one night, we were supposed to hang out, and he asked me to meet me at the morgue. This was in the middle of the night, nobody else was there. I figured that we'd meet up and leave to get some food or just talk in his car like usual, but instead, he wanted me to come inside this night. He showed me around the little rooms in the office. It was kind of cool, like being in a horror video game, sort of. Then he told me to wait, and he left me in the office. After a few minutes, he texted me and he gave me some directions and told me to come into a room that I hadn't been in yet. It was the room where they kept all the bodies ready for the freezer and do the paperwork. I didn't know. So I went inside and there was a dead body just out in the open in the middle of the room on a gurney. I literally froze in the doorway because I was not expecting this. I felt like I should be upset, but he thought that it was funny. In the end, I was sort of freaked out and just kind of played it cool. He wanted me to look at it. It was an old lady. I've seen plenty of stuff on the internet, so I thought to myself this wasn't as messed up as it was at the time. He finished up and then took me into the freezer to show me other bodies. There were like 6 in there, in body bags. Only one other one was unzipped. He also showed me the oven where they cremated the bodies. This was all in the middle of the night, mind you. No warning on my part, nobody else in the building, and I kind of just blocked out the memory for a couple of months after it happened. I started having some other issues with this guy, and I ended up telling the story to a friend. And my friend helped me realize that that whole situation was just really messed up. I just thought that I'd share this with you guys too, because since then I've had some issues with this dude, and I finally have him blocked on everything, but this whole situation is going from creepy ex-boyfriend to stalker vibes pretty quickly. Hopefully he leaves me alone, but if he doesn't, then I'll be sure to let you guys know. I've heard many stories here, and I've always wondered, what if I should share my story too? Generally, I'm a very skeptical person about anything paranormal, religious beliefs, concepts like auras or energies or anything like that. But this story is mostly about my mother, who decided to share it with me one day when I was a bit older. But first, I'll start with a small anecdote of mine that I believe could be connected to this story. So when I was between 5 and 8 years old, I lived with my mother in my great-grandmother's old house. At the time, I had many stuffed animals, toys, and makeup kits for kids. Every time I came home from school, I would find my toys scattered pretty much everywhere, and many of them would even go missing. The most striking thing, though, happened to me was when my mum asked me to go and tell my uncle, who lived further back on the property, that we were leaving with him in the morning in his car. At the time, I was unpacking one of my disorganized makeup kits. After informing my uncle, I returned to find the kit completely organized. I went to my mum and I asked her if she had done it. She looked confused at first, and I noticed a certain sort of seriousness in her face. Then suddenly she smiled and said, "Yes, sweetie, it was me. I just wanted to play a little prank on you." After that, I didn't give it too much thought. At the time, I used to sleep with her in a big bed, and one night, while we were sleeping, my mum got up and saw my great-grandmother putting a dish in the kitchen. My mum asked her if she had organized the makeup kit that I had spoken to her about. My great-grandmother, confused, said that she hadn't and had been resting the entire time. But something that caught my attention was when she said, "They've probably come back. They're back." My mum returned and I pretended to be asleep. Now, the next day, she took me to my grandmother's house to stay for a week. And when I came back, everything was normal and eventually I forgot about it. But since then, many strange things have happened to me, but I didn't pay much attention to them, I guess you could say. Now, here's my mother's story. So not long ago, she asked me if I remembered what happened with the makeup kit, and I said yes, of course. She then told me that when she was 6 years old, she lived in that same house with her grandmother, my great-grandmother, and slept in the same room where we used to sleep. Her grandmother had her own room, and she said that she used to hear small footsteps inside of her room every night. Things would be moved around, clothes would disappear, and objects would even go missing. Now one night, she felt something climb onto her bed, like a cat had jumped onto it. She got scared and hid under the covers, when suddenly, something spoke to her from the darkness. It introduced itself with a very tiny voice and asked her not to turn on the light. And from that night on, everything changed. They visited her every night, talking to her. She would ask them who they were and what they wanted, and these things simply said that they were her friends and had come to visit her because they liked her. As the nights went on, she started to have doubts and became afraid. These voices would tell her to go with them, that they would take her to beautiful places full of colors and toys. Over time, they got closer and even began to touch her. She described their hands as very tiny, like a newborn baby's hands. One night, one of them even pulled her hair playfully, and that's when she started to get really worried. They kept insisting that she crawl under the bed for some reason. The fear grew so much that she asked her grandmother if she could sleep in her room, telling her that the goblins wanted to take her away. My great-grandmother, who was very religious but didn't believe in fantasy, agreed to sleep with her in her room eventually. And while they slept, these things returned and woke my mother up. She could feel them pulling on her clothes, trying to sort of drag her under the bed a bit. She finally managed to wake her grandmother, and before too long, her grandmother suddenly stood up, turned on the light, and they both heard things scurrying around the room. Crying, my mother explained everything that she had heard all those nights. Her grandmother told her not to worry, and admitted that she had heard them too. She carried my mother to her own room and locked my mother's bedroom with a padlock. The next morning, very early, they called people from the church to come and inspect the house. They didn't doubt my great-grandmother too, as she was considered to be a wise and truthful woman. And when they moved the bed, there was a hole in the floor, about the size of my mother, and very deep, as she described it. Well, they sealed it with cement that day and placed wooden planks over it too. When my mum told me this story, I asked my great-grandmother about it while she was still alive, and she confirmed my mother's story and shared what she had heard as well. From then on, every time I visited that house, it always gave me an eerie feeling. My mum said that she was afraid these things might have come back for me. Since they sealed the hole, they never bothered her again, but I still can't explain what happened with my makeup set and all of the stuffed animals that I've lost. Whatever the case may be, it's a very skin-crawling story, isn't it? For a bit of context, this happened about 2 years ago, a few weeks after my little brother was born. Ever since we moved into this house, there's been this small room in the basement that's always been locked. To show you how little anybody uses it, I still don't really know what's even in there, but I've always assumed that it's just a utility room for like meters or something. The room, though, is really tiny, barely big enough to lie down in. Now, my parents went away for a weekend together, leaving me, my older sister, and my baby brother, who was just a few weeks old at the time, at home. My parents trusted us to take care of ourselves since we'd done this before, plus my sister was pretty old at this time. I was also pretty grown up at this stage as well. Anyway, that night my sister went out with some friends and wasn't planning to come back until 4 or 5 in the morning. I watched a good movie, and since it was already getting late, I decided to put my little brother into bed in his room upstairs. I did that as he was asleep and came back down to watch another movie, but I ended up falling asleep at some stage. I would say probably about 2 or 3 hours later, around midnight, I woke up to these strange noises coming from upstairs. At first I thought it was just the neighbors, since they can be pretty loud and the walls are thin here. But then I looked at the time and I realized that it was far too late for them to still be awake, let alone making that kind of noise. So I got closer to the stairs to investigate, and just as I was about to go up the first step, I heard the sound of something metal falling on the ground. It was the key to the small room in the basement. I immediately grabbed my phone, and instead of calling the police, I texted my friends to tell them what was happening. One of my friends had the great idea of calling the police for me, and suddenly I heard the bathroom door slam shut. I knew that it was that door because it makes a very specific creaking noise when it closes. I remembered my brother was sleeping upstairs, so I carefully went up to check if he was okay. Thankfully, he was fine. And still not fully grasping just how much danger I was in, I went to the bathroom door, and since it opens inwardly, I decided to violently push it open, and when I did this, I heard a man scream. I immediately shut the door and held it closed to keep him from getting out. He broke the window, and outside the bathroom there's this sort of balcony, not a proper one, but it's sort of like a tiny little area that you can stand on. You get the idea, but it connects to the balconies of the neighboring houses, which are really close together, and he used this to escape. I grabbed my brother in my arms, ran to the kitchen, and noticed that one of the knives was missing from the knife block. I picked up another knife and crouched in the corner of the living room, crying like I never had before. The police arrived. I opened the door for them, and when they searched the house, they confirmed that the bathroom window was indeed broken, and apparently I had hit the guy so hard that there was blood on the floor. But the most shocking and perhaps traumatizing part was what they found in that small basement room. There were blankets, cans of food, and they concluded that someone had been living there for several days. So for a little bit of context, I've been working for a pizza chain in Australia for around 2 years as a delivery driver. I've seen some things that you would generally expect, like drunken idiots, generally sus people. Someone even robbed me for the pizzas once. Rarely, though, have I ever had anything else weird happen, but I have had 2 paranormal encounters while I was on the job. Now, the first one happened a few months in after I started. I was delivering an order to a part of the town that was further out, a few houses dotted here and there. I was driving along this road. Each side there was grass and reeds about as tall as the car, which was an old 2004 Toyota Corolla. It was around maybe 1.5 meters tall, just under 5 feet. But as I was driving down this road, this thing sprinted across the road on all fours, tilted its head at me while it ran, and ran on through to the other side. Now, the only way that I could describe this thing was that it had a dog head which looked like a part of its jaw was missing and I could see its teeth. But it did look like it had dog teeth, perhaps. I couldn't really see the other half of it, but whatever it was, it didn't have fur or anything like that. It also did not have a tail, and its skin looked like it belonged to a human, perhaps. It had what I presumed to be cuts and dirt marks around its neck, but it did move way too fast to see the rest of its body, so I can't be totally sure. When the headlights hit it, its eyes were this creamy white color. It came around just at the start of the windscreen when looking at it, which would have made it around 80 or so centimeters tall, maybe around 2'7". The way that it ran, though, was really strange as well. Almost like it was galloping, I want to say. It lifted its back feet up to its front and sprung itself forward with its upper body. I did some research into the area that I live in, and there aren't too many paranormal encounters or alleged cryptids or anything, and nothing matched its description at all. I also asked one of my friends who was indigenous, and he couldn't think of any legends that matched what I had described. Granted, indigenous populations are pretty sparse in Australia, and it's hard to find someone who is traditionally from the area that you live in, particularly in my region. So, if anyone has any possible ideas on this event, I would really love to know. The next encounter happened around 2 or so months after the previous one. So I was delivering a pizza to the more suburban part of the city. This street that I was on was pretty much, if you looked up one direction, you would be facing a soccer field, and if you looked the other, you would be facing this graveyard. I finished delivering this order and I got this sudden, I don't know, like an intense feeling of like being watched. So I pretty much sprint back to the car and hop inside, locking the doors behind me. I looked behind me, which would have been facing the cemetery. There's nothing there. I start up the car and go to readjust the rearview mirror because I accidentally bumped it with one of those insulated food cells on the way in. I looked into the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw, standing behind me from maybe around 2 meters or so, there was this tall, dark figure. Seeing that, I instantly sped off and I didn't look back. I also had one other experience while driving in this same area, but this one happened when I was off the job actually. I was driving back home from a town close by, and this road has some areas which are reasonably wooded. Like, you can still see what's out there, but it's just that there's still a few trees around and it can be a little difficult at times. But I was at one of these areas when suddenly out of nowhere, this woman in this really long white dress walked out onto the road and just stopped right in front of me. I instantly slammed my brakes. I knew that I was going to miss her as she was still around 10 meters or so in front of me, and I was already going fairly slow because it was a wet road, luckily. However, before I fully stopped, she just completely vanished. She was gone. Nothing was left behind at all. Honestly, the best way that I can describe it, it was like someone was edited out of a video and just cut her out. It was like a blink and she was just gone. If anyone has any ideas about any of these encounters, but especially the first one, I would really, really love to hear from you. So I used to live in Nova Scotia, Canada, more specifically in the Sambro-Ketch Harbour area, and if you've ever been around this area, you've probably heard of Sambro Island, and its absolutely beautiful lighthouse and very cool history. My first time hearing this story, and the actual story itself, takes place on this island. I'll try to tell you exactly how the story goes, based off of what I remember. So way back when the lighthouses still needed lightkeepers to stay running, oftentimes they would be on the islands for months before returning home. Because of that, and also the living conditions on the island, things like insanity, depression, paranoia, loneliness, and even suicide were unfortunately quite common. I'm not sure exactly when this takes place, but I do know that it was in the 1700s or maybe early 1800s. So the active lightkeeper on the island was, as you can imagine, depressed, lonely, and always super tired due to the requirement that they wake up multiple times a night to make sure that the light stays on at all times. Eventually, he couldn't stand his life anymore, and unfortunately he hung himself from the railing of the spiral staircase inside of this lighthouse. His body unfortunately stayed there for many months before they sent a ship out to pick him up to take him home. Of course, all they found was a pretty big mess, and his body was removed and given a proper sea burial. However, it took much longer to remove the horrible stench that had come from the whole event, because it was all over the wooden stairs and railings of the lighthouse. But once the smell had finally subsided, they sent another lightkeeper out to take the man's place. However, it only took 2 weeks for this lightkeeper to take the boat that they had supplied him, that they now realized was a good idea, and flee from the island out of fear. According to the man, he would often smell cigarette smoke and the smell of rot at the top of the lighthouse and around other parts of the island where the man had never even been. Apparently, he caught glimpses of the dead lightkeeper with a lantern, roaming the island and around the lighthouse at all hours of the day. Of course, the common loneliness and paranoia, in addition to these occurrences, was enough to drive him mad, and so he fled the island. It is said to this day that if you visit that island and get the feeling that you're being watched, well, you most likely are, and you should leave immediately. However, if you don't leave fast enough or do something to irritate the lightkeeper, there's a good chance that you may smell cigarette smoke on your boat, even after you've left the island. This happened over a decade ago when I was 12 years old. I live in a small town in Oklahoma, and in my neighborhood the houses are fairly spread apart, separated by woods. It was a school day, so my grandma picked me up from school and brought me home that day. This was the first year that I got dropped off at my house alone, because before this, I would just go to my grandma's house after school. I would get dropped off at around 3 p.m. and my parents would be home at around 4:30. Not that big of a deal. Well, today for some reason, my dad wasn't going to be home until later, around 7, and my mum, who was a teacher, wouldn't be home until around 8 p.m. because she had parent-teacher conferences at school that day. This happened in the early fall, so it wouldn't even be dark until at least 8:30. So I did what I usually did when I get home. I ran upstairs, got on my Xbox 360, and just played some Minecraft with my friends. Today it was just me and my friend Seth, and I was playing for about 2 hours when I heard a car door shut in my driveway, no one should have been here until like 7 p.m. at least. But my house is set up to where my upstairs has windows that look over my driveway, so with my mic on and controller in hand, I went to the window to see who it was. I mean, maybe my dad had got home earlier than expected or something. I looked outside. It was a red truck. No one I know drives a red truck. Well, the person pulled into the middle of my driveway, but the weird thing is that he was sideways, like he owned the place. When I looked out the window, I saw a man with a hat, wearing a big camo hoodie and jeans. It was September, so no one should have been wearing a big hoodie and jeans in Oklahoma at this stage. By the time that I looked, he was already almost out of view, going up to my walkway to my front door. I thought maybe it was one of my dad's friends or something, or someone my dad hired to do something, but he would usually tell me if someone was going to be coming over. Well, soon after I hear a knock at the door, then another, so I go to my other window that was a better view of the walkway up to my front door, and I see this guy walking back down the walkway. I switch and go back to looking through the windows, overlooking my driveway. I'm relaying all of this to Seth, mind you, still on the mic with me. I tell Seth that he's walking back to his truck now. Instead, though, he walks past his truck and suddenly tries to open my garage side door. At this point, my heart instantly sinks. I tell Seth that this guy just tried to get into my house. He's trying to break in. Mind you, it's literally broad daylight at like 5 p.m. Luckily, it was locked because sometimes we do forget to lock it, but this day we hadn't. After he tried the door, he starts walking to my back patio. I instantly drop my headset and I quietly run down the stairs to see what he was doing. I get downstairs and stand behind the wall so that I'm not visible from the back door or living room windows, and I just listen. I hear him try to open the door, then I hear a thud. It sounded like he maybe dropped a brick on the ground or something. At this point, I'm more scared than I've ever been. I wanted to call my parents or grandma, but I didn't have a cell phone yet. The only phone in the house was in my kitchen, and I would have to cross my living room to get there, and he would definitely be able to see me if I went into there. A few seconds after the thud, I peeked around the corner and he was gone. I run back upstairs and put my headset back on, telling Seth that he just tried to open the back door as well. As I'm telling this, I hear a car door shut, and this time when I look out the window, he seems to have finally gotten into his truck. I looked at the truck closer, and I noticed that the only thing that he has in his truck bed was a crowbar and a shovel. He sat in his truck for what felt like a few minutes, and during this time, Seth told me to get my iPod out and take a picture of his license plate. Problem was, though, is that he was parked sideways, so I couldn't really see it. Then, he drove backwards out of my driveway and down the road so fast that I just couldn't get a picture. A few minutes after he was confirmed gone, I went downstairs to see what the thud could have been. I get to the back door and I can see that the doormat was moved. Both big plant pots had been moved as well, which means that he was definitely looking for a key. We do have a hidden key back there too. The key to the back door was under one of the smaller pots on a ledge near the door, not the bigger ones that he had checked under. I went to the front porch and all of those pots were looked under as well because they'd definitely been moved. Truly, I counted my blessings that day. Genuinely, I really don't know what I would have done if he would have found that key, or if he had just broken in. After he left, I quickly called my dad and told him what had happened. When my dad got home, he had a cop come over and I told him what happened and gave him a description. Thankfully, the guy never came back, but I also don't think that they ever caught him either. This past Monday, I went to bed with my girlfriend. We had stayed up watching TV till early hours of the morning and went to sleep at around 3 or 4 a.m. I lay in bed for ages trying to fall asleep, but I struggled. Not unusual for me. At some point, though, I started to feel very uneasy and just had this overwhelming feeling come over me. I started to feel like I was drifting into sleep paralysis, but I could still move. In fact, I deliberately kept moving around to avoid sleep paralysis. But this feeling grew stronger and stronger, and I could hear noises outside of the bedroom. And in the dark room, I could see what I could only describe as a shape. I couldn't quite make out what it was, though. And I felt like something was here with me. I tried to fight this feeling for a few minutes before I gave up as I felt whatever it was right there next to me. I started to hear weird noises and what sounded like throat singing or vocalization by Native Americans or something similar. I then sat up and woke my girlfriend up. I suddenly felt a strong sense of dread. Then I experienced what felt like a strong vibrating or magnetic force trying to pull me up. At the same time, I was what I can only describe as spoken to in my mind by various different voices, which sounded like vibratory robotic voices. These voices were telling me to let go and come with them. When I closed my eyes, I could see the shapes of your typical alien grey, as well as other shapes that I couldn't make out and was too scared to focus on. These voices, though, were telling me that they can share power, knowledge, and enlightenment of which I cannot begin to comprehend. I had a strong gut feeling not to trust these entities or whatever was going on. I'm a devout Muslim, and I started reciting Quranic verses in my head and the declaration of my faith. These entities, they didn't seem to like this and made the vibrating feeling and the feeling of dread 10 times worse. They told me that there's higher entities. I also asked my girlfriend to play the Quran in the background, which started to sound very distorted all of a sudden. While all of this was going on, my heart was racing to a beat that I had never felt before, and I could feel it literally pounding in my chest. My head was pounding and my eyes were really sore all of a sudden too. During this experience, I was questioning if I was beginning to lose my mind, as you can imagine. I am of sound mind though, and I've never had any psychotic or manic episodes or ever shown signs of any mental illness. After this episode, my comprehension of time though was really distorted for about 24 hours. What I mean is that I stayed in bed after this for the whole day and I didn't realize how much time had gone by. I also had a crushing headache, which has only just eased today. My eyes felt really sore, like the pain that I experienced after laser eye surgery, and the tip of my nose was also very sore, as well as dried blood in my nose after the experience. But this also brings up another thing. It had me thinking about the time that I had sleep paralysis a few years ago. It was a proper sleep paralysis, and it was of a 4-foot-tall, typical alien grey-shaped figure visiting me. This new experience, it has me questioning whether that sleep paralysis was, well, sleep paralysis at all, or something else, or if it's somehow related at all. Since this experience, I have been very disassociated. I've barely left my room and just feel, well, generally uneasy, I guess you could say. I have this fear that it's going to happen again, and I do believe that I was visited by something. Whether extraterrestrial, demonic, or something else, I really don't know, but it definitely has me questioning everything ever since. I've always believed my house was normal, nothing strange or creepy about it. Mostly because it's a relatively new building, I suppose, built in the 90s, and I live alone. I like the idea of not having neighbors too close, so I chose a house in a more isolated area. But for the past few weeks, there's been something happening here that I can't explain. It all started one night when, around 2 a.m., I just sort of woke up suddenly. There was no noise, but I had that strange feeling of not being alone. I turned toward the door of my bedroom, and that was when I noticed it. The closet door down the hallway was slightly ajar. Now, I always make a habit of closing every door in the house before going to bed, just to avoid waking up and seeing half-open doors in the dark that creep me out. So I thought maybe I had forgotten to close it, even though I felt a little bit uneasy by it. In the end, I decided to get up and shut it and just sort of forget about it. I closed it properly this time, pulling it until I heard the click of the latch. I went back to bed, trying not to think about it, but it took a while before I finally fell back asleep. Now, the next night, the same thing happened. Around 2 in the morning, I wake up again, and the closet door is open again, even though I had definitely closed it. This time, I got a chill down my spine, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I hadn't closed it properly? In the following days, though, the situation worsened. Every single night, I woke up at the same time, and every night, that door was open, no matter how carefully I closed it. So one evening, I decided to place a chair against the door so I could hear it if anything moved. But when I woke up, I found that the chair had definitely shifted, and the door was now slightly open. There were no signs of forced entry, no animals or strong winds that could have moved it. And every night, always at the same time, that door keeps opening. I cannot sleep anymore, and I'm starting to think that maybe I'm really not alone in this house. So I was just driving home from hanging out with some friends, and I saw a stray dog trotting up the street. It was about 10:45 p.m., and I've always been an avid animal lover, spending my childhood begging my parents to let me help stray animals or take them home. And now that I'm an adult, I have my own dog, but carry extra dog food and a lead in my car, just in case I happen to cross a pup in need. Now, this dog was running down a pretty busy road and then turned onto a side street, so I decided to stop to see if I could get it to come to me with some food. I called it, and it definitely looked interested for a moment. I dropped some food on the sidewalk, but then it took off. I got back into my car and turned left at the next street, and then left again to get back onto the main road. I see the dog again, and it's moving more slowly now, so I think maybe there's a better chance that I can get it to come to me. I stop again, and as I'm getting out of my car, a large Suburban drives by. I stare at them directly because I'm worried they won't see the dog and they might actually hit them. I lose sight of the dog while I'm watching the Suburban, which then turns around. They pull up next to my parked car and stop. I walk 1 to 2 steps forward, waiting for them to roll down their passenger window, but the guy rolls down the driver's side window, opposite side, and I ask, "Hey, sorry to bother you, but is that your dog?" He says something indiscernible and then gets out of the vehicle, and I realize that he's actually wearing a ski mask. He says, "What are you doing? I saw you outside of my house." To clarify, I never left the road or the sidewalk at all. I hold up my bag of dog food and lead and say, there was a dog and I was trying to get it to come to me." At the same time, I move towards my car and open the door with my hand on the lock as he's moving toward me. The dude then hustles back into his Suburban and basically peels out of there, turns off the street without stopping at the stop sign. I don't know what his intentions were, but I'm genuinely grateful to be home and on the couch with my dog now. I hate that I feel stupid and regretful for trying to do a kind task of helping an animal in need. I feel like it's going to deter me from doing it again in the future, in fact. I don't want to tell my fiancé or friends about it because they'll probably tell me that I shouldn't have stopped. But how is this world ever going to become a better place if everyone just stops doing good deeds out of fear? It was around 9 or 10 p.m. and I, male and 16, was skateboarding at a skate park around 5 minutes away from my house. I don't have a car yet, so I usually just skate there, and usually I do have to deal with some creepy or strange people because, well, I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and in a not great part of town, so that's pretty much a common thing here. Now this night, I went alone and there was only one other person at the park who I had met there for the first time. We had a pretty good time and we skated for around maybe about an hour, just me and him. But eventually a guy with a child came walking into the skate park and he came up to us. The first weird thing that I noticed though is that the child that he had no shoes and was wearing pants and a t-shirt, even though it was pretty cold outside, even for me with a hoodie on. Another thing that was strange too was that he had what seemed to be a gun with him. I noticed the guy had some tattoos and was around 6 foot maybe. But this guy first starts talking to the guy that I was skating with and tells him that he cuts hair and if he ever needs a barber to hit him up. My friend says thanks and then he walks over to me and says the same thing. I just say, "Oh, alright, thank you," and thought that he would leave, but no. He asks if his son could try my board. I was a little hesitant at first, but I said, "Alright." I mean, the child didn't seem to want to even try. He had to pick him up by his arms and put him on it. Eventually, though, the child stands on it and is trying it. While he's doing that, the guy turns to me and repeats himself, saying that he's a barber and that he's just here with his nephew. I thought it was really weird, though, that he had just said that he was his son first, and now he's saying that this kid's his nephew. Well, skipping ahead like 10 minutes, my friend leaves me there and the guy is still there. He asks me to do a trick for his nephew, and while I'm doing it, forces him to watch by holding his head in place towards me. After I do it, he repeats himself again, saying that he's a barber if I ever need a cut and that he's here with his son. I then sort of confront him and say, "Didn't you say that he was your nephew?" To which he says, "Oh yeah, sorry, I get it confused sometimes, my bad." I just shrug it off and tell him that I need to go. He then says, yeah, his dad's coming to pick us up now anyway. So I'm leaving and I look back and he's getting into a car. I'm not actually going home yet, obviously. I was just skating to McDonald's to have something to eat, but I then see the car drive off, but instead of going in the opposite direction, he goes the same way that I'm going to the same McDonald's. He comes up to me again and says, "Hey, what a weird coincidence, I was hungry too," or something like that. At that point, there was something sus going on, so I just leave, but not before he repeats himself again and asks for my number. But I say no thanks and I just get out of there. He was a really weird guy, and I wonder if that kid was even his kid in the end. I don't know what was going on, but the whole situation just seemed really sus. For a little bit of backstory, I, a 19-year-old female, used to live in Western Australia, Perth, with my mother and my stepfather. This story happened when I was in year 5. I was about 10 years old. Moving was rather difficult for me in year 4. A new place, a new school, new siblings. But I was finally away from the abuse and the torture of my old home, so I was pretty thankful for that. Thankfully, too, after a year, things got a bit easier for me. While my mental health was still a bit of an issue, I was settling in nicely with this new school. Just a few months before my birthday in Year 5, my class and another Year 5 class, they organised an excursion to Fremantle Prison as a history lesson in some sense. While I was nervous because it wasn't a place that I was familiar with, I had my friends to lean on if I was a bit overwhelmed. Once we arrived on the bus, the tour guide took us through the old prison. I was honestly amazed at the history and the layout. It was truly a pretty interesting place. Eventually, the guide took us to the second floor, and we stopped on the side as the guide taught us about the safety nets that were in between the stairs and how it was in place because the inmates, apparently they would attempt to either self-delete or others by pushing or jumping off the guardrails. As he was talking about it, I sort of subconsciously looked to the side, being the curious 10-year-old that I was, down the halls where the cells were. For those who know about Fremantle Prison, you might also know that it's said to be haunted by inmates that had died there in the past. Well, as I looked down the hall, holding my friend's hand because I was a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of people that were there, I noticed something. A person. I don't just mean a shadow too, a whole person. He was middle-aged, maybe around 45 to 50, but the weirdest thing is that this guy was completely naked. Well, except for some white underwear and had a large wound on his head. We sort of stared at each other for a good 10 seconds before he walked into a cell and just disappeared from sight. But the cell doors were shut. He shouldn't have been able to do that, which means that he must have just phased through the door. I was horrified. I held my friend's hand tighter and shuffled so I was stood behind them. "What's wrong?" they asked, their voice soft and kind like always. I didn't respond. I mean, even if I wanted to, my voice just wouldn't come out. My friend stared at me for a moment before sighing. I'm guessing they assumed I was a little bit shaken by the whole inmate self-deletion thing, and wrapped their arm around my shoulders, keeping me close. Now, I know my mental state back then was pretty terrible, and I had and still do have some hallucinations due to trauma I went through, but I genuinely believe that must have been something else. My hallucinations were never and are never that detailed. Anytime I see a person, it's usually just sort of a shadow, but this guy looked completely real. I've never talked about this with, well, anyone, not even my therapist, because honestly, just thinking about it makes me paranoid. I came here to tell you guys this story because it seemed like a place that I could share it, and I really, really needed to get it off of my chest. When I, male and 25, was little, 3 or 4, my family lived in a city with many historic buildings and houses that were built in the late 1800s. Our house, it was one of these historic buildings, so there were a lot of public records available for it, and that will be relevant later. And the house was even featured as a part of the local historical bus tour at one stage. In this house, there was a room on the second floor which was always colder than every other room in the house. My parents said that this was due to the room being an addition and subsequently having poorer insulation, but I'm really not sure if that's actually true. The room was small and square and stuck out from the side of the house, so it had windows on 3 walls. While we lived there, this room was designated as my playroom, and all of my toys were kept in there. Well, I used to tell my parents about how a little girl often came to play with me. I described to them that she had brown hair, a white dress with poofy sleeves, and that she was my age and would come in through the window. Again, though, the room was on the second floor. I'm not sure what my parents thought of this at the time, probably chalked it up to my overactive imagination. But a year or so later, We were living in a new house in a new city, and my parents were doing some scrapbooking. They had gotten old newspaper clippings and other documents about the house from these local public records. And at one point, my mum was looking at an old newspaper clipping of the original family who owned the house, and I pointed over her to the daughter in the picture and said to my mum, "That's the little girl that played with me." I saw my family a few days ago at Thanksgiving and was reminded of this while reminiscing. This is one of 2 major paranormal events that have happened to me in my life so far. This was from like 20 years ago now, but it definitely still sticks with me. This first happened in late 2023. I was coming home from a tattoo appointment at about 8 p.m. and my boyfriend was at work. It was really quiet in the house as only one other roommate was still awake. I went into my room to greet my cat and lay down for a bit. And as I was changing my clothes, I heard a distinct, rhythmic breathing coming from under my bed. It was so clear and so human-like, I turned off my music and texted my boyfriend to tell him that I was afraid that someone may be in our room and had broken in. He pointed out that there's no way that a human could fit under our bed. There was nobody in the closet or anywhere else in the room when I was changing, but I still heard the same distinct inhale and exhale for another hour or so at least. My cat was even acting weird, like she could hear it too. I stayed on the bed and turned the TV volume up so that I couldn't hear it as well until I finally couldn't hear it at all. My boyfriend believed me and understood why I was creeped out. Fast forward to early 2024, I was visiting my friend out of town and he texted me to tell me that he could hear it too. The same inhale and exhale, steady and human-like. He said that it was definitely coming from under the bed. We've both heard it once or twice more through the course of this year, and it is unsettling, whatever it is.